The divorce papers were already printed. The guests were already seated. And the man she had trusted with every part of herself looked her in the eyes and said, coldly, without hesitation, "What's the point of keeping you?" She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just waited. Because Harper Quinn had walked in 30 seconds earlier. And Harper Quinn was not just her best friend. She was a family law attorney. And she had done her homework. What happened in that room over the next few minutes is the kind of thing that makes you believe that dignity always finds a way. That the people who try to humiliate you in public sometimes hand you exactly the power you need to walk away free. Adrienne's story is not just about a bad marriage or a cruel family. It's about what it looks like to break a cycle, quietly, completely, and on your own terms, and it will stay with you. Watch until the end. If it speaks to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe. Because stories like this one deserve to be told. This content was researched, built, and manually edited by us to bring meaning and lessons.
I'm still haunted by the words my friend Derek confessed he used. If you cannot provide this family with an heir, what is your purpose here? That was his question, delivered with a chilling emptiness as he handed Kayla the divorce papers. He staged this ambush in a conference room filled with 22 colleagues, a cruel, practiced smile fixed on his lips. The silence was absolute, he said, until Megan, Kayla's closest friend, strode forward and placed a single manila envelope on the table before him. In the space of 2 seconds, Derek's entire world tilted on its axis. He told me the smirk on his face didn't just vanish, it shattered, then collapsed into itself. In that instant, the foundations of the empire he'd bartered his own soul to inherit started to fracture. To grasp how my friend reached that breaking point, you have to go back. You have to witness the man he was pretending to be and the exceptional woman he chose to dismantle. The saga of Derek Sterling and Kayla Walsh began, as he tells it, on a perfectly average Tuesday in June. It was at some fundraising gala she'd almost blown off. One of those sticky Austin evenings where the humidity hangs in the air like a wet wool blanket, long after the sunset. She'd been buried alive all day under swatches of fabric and paint chips at her interior design studio on South Congress, a venture she'd built from nothing that was finally gaining serious traction. By 6 in the evening, her highest aspiration was a date with her couch and a carton of pad thai. But Megan Miller, her ride or die since their college days, and now one of the city's most formidable divorce lawyers, flatly refused to let her bail. "You are going," Megan had insisted over coffee that morning, sliding the embossed invitation across their table. "It's for a children's reading charity. You adore books. You adore children. And you desperately need to meet a man who isn't paying you to pick out his sofa." So, Kayla went. She found herself adrift in an old navy dress, nursing a glass of awful Chardonnay in the grand ballroom of the Driscoll Hotel, feeling profoundly out of place among Austin's power players. Megan, a natural social butterfly, had abandoned her within 10 minutes to work the room. Kayla was already mentally mapping her exit route when Derek seemed to coalesce out of thin air beside her. "You have the look of someone who would rather be literally anywhere else." She pivoted, and there he was. My friend, Derek. Tall, around 6'2", with dark hair just beginning to salt at the temples. He wore his confidence like a custom-tailored suit, the quiet certainty of a man who'd never been told no. His suit was perfect. his smile a carefully calibrated weapon designed for immediate trust. Is it that obvious? She'd asked. Only to a person feeling the exact same way, he replied, extending a hand. Derek Sterling. Kayla Walsh. Her handshake, he told me, was confident and warm. So, Kayla Walsh, what is it you do when you're not suffering through high society fundraisers? She let out a genuine laugh, and he said the sound of it caught him completely off guard. I'm an interior designer. I own a studio over on South Congress. No way, he said, leaning closer with an air of pure fascination. I work in commercial real estate. I spend my days trying to breathe life into towers of concrete and glass. And just like that, they cut through the superficial chatter. They fell into a real discussion about architecture, about the characterless high rises scarring the Austin skyline, and a shared desire to build things with some genuine soul. 2 hours disappeared in what felt like minutes. When Megan eventually came back to retrieve her, Derek had secured Kayla's phone number. Their first official date was the following week. He chose a rooftop spot with a view of the lake, the city lights shimmering across the water. It was a scene pulled from a romance film. And he inquired about her work. And I mean, he truly inquired. He described how he leaned in, creating a bubble around them, where her words were the only thing that mattered. She was describing the restoration of a historic house in Clarksville, and he was absolutely mesmerized. My family's business, Sterling Properties. We're launching a major new downtown development, he mentioned as dessert arrived. I would kill for your professional opinion on our plans. You want it to feel like it belongs in Austin, not like another glass monolith dropped from orbit. Are you seriously trying to get a free consultation on our first date? She teased. I'm seriously interested in the perspective of someone with real creative vision. That was the moment. That was the hook. For the next 8 months, her universe contracted to orbit Derek. The relationship moved at a velocity that should have been terrifying, but he made it feel completely natural. They took weekend trips to Santa Fe, exploring art galleries and staying up all night talking. They spent a Thanksgiving in New Orleans, where he charmed her mother, Eleanor, promising over coffee and beignets that he would always cherish her daughter. He would appear at her studio with lattes when she was battling a deadline, setting up his laptop in a corner to work beside her in companionable silence. He awarded her the design contract for his company's new Riverside Tower, the single largest project of her career, and then bragged to everyone that she was the most talented designer in the entire state of Texas. From his own account, and from what I observed, it was the first time she had ever felt completely seen by a romantic partner, not just as a creative mind or a companion, but as his definitive choice, his one. Then, around 4 months into their relationship, he brought her to meet his parents. The Sterling family home was a sprawling compound in the West Lake Hills, the kind of property that signaled wealth so deep it was silent. His father, William Sterling, opened the door. He was an older, harder version of Derek, with a handshake that felt like a financial review. His voice was quiet but carried immense weight, the kind used to command boardrooms without ever being raised. Kayla, Derek has told us a great deal about you. All good things, I hope, she replied, attempting a light tone. That is yet to be determined, he said, offering a smile that was all structure and no warmth. Catherine Sterling, Derek's mother, was like a flawless piece of art, a woman whose life was dedicated to upholding a perfect image. She welcomed Kayla with 2 air kisses near her cheeks and an appraisal that cataloged her worth in an instant. Her dress, her shoes, The conspicuous lack of inherited jewelry? Kayla, darling, do come in. We have been simply perishing to meet the young woman who has so captivated our Derek. Dinner was a cross-examination served on heirloom silver, hosted in a dining room formal enough for a state visit. It was just the four of them, and the silences were thick with unspoken evaluation. William interrogated her about her origins, her family, her pedigree. When she explained that her mother was a retired school teacher and her father had passed away when she was a girl, he offered a slow, dismissive inclination of his head. And your family is from the San Antonio area, correct? He didn't have to elaborate. The condescension was a palpable thing in the air. Catherine was more polished, but her inquiries were no less invasive. Derek informs us, you have your own little business. How very enterprising, she remarked. But ultimately, what truly matters is family, a legacy, continuity, the things that last. The word continuity was used no less than 3 times, and with each repetition, it sounded more like a contractual obligation than a family value. And Derek, my friend, was a ghost at his own table. As his father condescended about her state university education, Derek simply refilled her wine glass. As his mother pontificated on the particular type of woman needed to secure a sterling future, he just offered a weak squeeze of her hand beneath the table. She was silently pleading for him to intervene, to defend her, to simply state that he loved her. He didn't utter a single goddamn word. As they were about to depart, Catherine cornered her by the door. I am certain you appreciate, my dear, she murmured, her voice as smooth and toxic as mercury. This family is built upon a bedrock of continuity. It is essential that Derek produce something that will endure. Kayla managed a smile, but he told me he could feel the crushing weight of those words on her during the silent drive back to her apartment. They'll warm up, Derek finally offered, shattering the tense quiet. They're just traditional, overprotective. And because her love for him was so absolute, she believed him. She convinced herself that all families had their dysfunctions, that their connection was strong enough to overcome his parents' rigid expectations. 2 months later, in February, Derek asked her to marry him. He brought her back to the Driscoll, to that very same ballroom. He had rented the entire space. It was only the two of them, a string quartet and a diamond that was worth more than her business. He dropped to one knee on that cavernous, empty dance floor and declared, "You are the only person I want to build my future with." And she accepted. She genuinely believed she was saying yes to creating a life as partners, as a team. She was utterly unaware that she was accepting a position, not a proposal. She didn't understand that for the Sterlings, love was transactional, and she had never been shown the fine print. She had no inkling that the man who had listened with such rapt attention as she described her dreams had already classified her as a provisional asset. And she certainly had no idea that saying yes to my best friend would eventually require the forfeiture of everything she was. Their wedding took place that February at the Sterling Estate in Westlake, one of those places where the money is so established, it's completely silent. For Derek Sterling, the beginning of the end wasn't a screaming match or a slammed door. It was the chilling silence in the bridal suite. He'd later tell me that when his fiancée, Kayla, first laid eyes on her wedding dress, something inside her just seemed to switch off. The one element she had dreamed of, delicate, vintage lace sleeves that spoke of a timeless romance, was gone. In their place, his mother, Olivia, had commissioned stark, cold cap sleeves she deemed a more suitable design. The original lace, Olivia had declared with a dismissive wave of her hand, was simply too much. The seamstress, a woman caught in the crossfire, looked positively haunted. Mrs. Sterling signed off on the change last week, she whispered to Kayla, her voice trembling. An entire week had passed. Not a single word from Derek, not a mention from his mother, had been offered to the woman who was supposed to wear the gown. Kayla's best friend, Megan, found her staring into the mirror, her expression as blank and hard as marble. When she asked what was wrong, Kayla could only manage a brittle smile, blaming it on pre-wedding jitters. But Megan saw the truth. A deep, fundamental crack had just appeared in the foundation of this perfect day. In that moment, Olivia swept in, taking Kayla's hand in a grip that was both soft and unyielding, and uttered the 5 words that should never be spoken as a joke. "It's not too late to leave." Kayla's laugh was a hollow sound. The entire engagement had been a frantic 2-week sprint, a whirlwind completely orchestrated by Olivia, who had insisted she could manage every last detail. The venue, the catering, the towering floral arrangements, all of it was Olivia's vision. At first, Kayla had seen it as an astonishing gesture of generosity. But standing there, being zipped into a dress that felt like a costume, she finally understood it for what it was: a hostile takeover of her own life. Just then, her mother, Linda, arrived, a quiet presence in a world of frantic luxury. Linda had driven in from out of town that morning, wearing a simple navy dress that felt like an anchor to reality. In the opulent chaos of the bridal suite, she seemed wonderfully, heartbreakingly out of place. "You're so beautiful, honey," Linda said, her kiss a small moment of genuine warmth on Kayla's cheek. Then she leaned close, her whisper a lifeline. "Are you absolutely 100% sure about this?" Kayla's reply was automatic, practiced. "I'm sure, Mom." Linda just nodded, her hands gently adjusting the veil. "All right, but you need to know you don't owe anyone a single thing, not even after you say I do." Derek would later admit Kayla had no idea what she meant. Not really, as she stepped onto the manicured lawn toward a floral arch that cost more than a car. And from my seat, I saw the stark reality of it. It was a massive wedding, at least 150 guests seated in perfectly aligned white chairs. And they were all Derek's. They were his father's business partners. Olivia's entire social registry, a sprawling network of faces Kayla had never seen before. She had wanted her people there, the friends who had shaped her life, but Olivia had shut it down with that signature, chillingly sweet tone. "Darling," she'd cooed, "this is a family affair." Kayla's family affair amounted to 10 seats. 10. Her mother, Megan, and a few scattered relatives formed a tiny, solitary island in a vast ocean of strangers. Across the aisle, Derek stood at the altar, looking like a prince from a storybook. When Kayla finally reached him, he offered that devastatingly charming smile, and she confessed to him later that for one fleeting second, the profound sickness in her stomach actually subsided. This was the man she loved, after all. The man who brought her coffee without asking, who could listen for hours as she mapped out her design concepts. The man who had promised her a partnership, a life they would build brick by brick, together. "You look incredible," he whispered, and she summoned every ounce of her will to believe him, to feel it. The reception that followed was a dizzying blur of expensive champagne and superficial greetings from people whose eyes slid right past her. Olivia, Derek recounted, was the undisputed commander of the evening, a general directing her troops, dictating the precise moment for the cake cutting, orchestrating their first dance as if it were a military maneuver. Derek's hand never left the small of Kayla's back, a constant guiding pressure that felt less like affection and more like a warning, as if he feared she might simply evaporate into the night. At one point, Kayla spotted her mother standing alone at the edge of the tent, looking utterly dwarfed by the spectacle. "Are you okay, Mom?" Kayla asked, her voice barely a whisper against the band's noise. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Linda replied, her gaze sweeping over the ice sculptures and the towering cake. "This is just a lot." Kayla tried to dismiss it, to normalize the insanity. "It's only for one night." Her mom's voice was quiet but heavy with meaning. "I know. I just really hope you don't get lost in all of it." Kayla gave her a quick kiss and turned away, deliberately refusing to hear the alarm bells ringing in her mother's words. Later, Megan managed to pull her into a quiet room. The second the door clicked shut, the facade dropped. "Kayla, be for real with me. Why is his mother in charge of your entire life?" Kayla's denial was weak, pathetic, even to her own ears. "She's not." Megan's eyes flashed. "She picked your dress. She picked your guests. She picked the freaking dinner menu." Kayla's only defense was a whisper. "She was just helping." Megan's final question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "And where was Derek in all of this?" Kayla faltered, searching for an excuse. "He trusts his mom. He just wants everyone to be happy," she finally managed to say. Megan's stare was merciless. "Everyone but you, it seems." "It's just one day," Kayla repeated, a desperate mantra against the rising tide of truth. "It doesn't matter." But it mattered more than anything. It was the blueprint for their entire marriage. Their honeymoon, a supposed escape to Napa Valley, was meant to be the antidote. The scene was set for romance, a rustic cottage nestled in a vineyard with views that could heal any wound. It was their chance to finally connect, to just be. And for 2 perfect days, they were. They explored wineries, wandered through sun-drenched towns, and sat on the porch at night, mapping out the future they had promised each other, the house, the kids, the life. And then Derek's father, Robert, called. "I need you to look over those Riverside contracts," he'd said, his voice stripping all the magic from the air. In an instant, the honeymoon was over. Derek, the husband, vanished, replaced by Derek, the employee. "It's time sensitive." He shot Kayla a look of pure agony. "I just need an hour." But 1 hour bled into 3. Kayla sat alone on the porch, watching the vibrant sunset fade to gray as the sound of Derek's voice filtered through the screen door. A repeating chorus of, "Yes, Dad. Right away, Dad." She feigned sleep when he finally crept into bed, the weight of his apology too heavy to bear. It happened twice more that week. Each time, Derek was filled with regret. Each time, Kayla assured him it was fine. By the time they boarded the plane home, a profound silence had settled between them, thick and suffocating. A few months later, back in the real world, the last of the wedding fantasy shattered completely. She had fought to keep her small design studio after they married. It was her sanctuary, the one corner of the world that was unequivocally hers. But the rent was a constant source of friction, and Derek began to drop little comments, framing it as an unnecessary expense. "We have a mortgage to think about now," he argued one evening. "You could easily work from home. We'd save so much." She tried to explain, her voice strained. "I need my own space, Derek." "But why?" he asked, his logic infuriatingly calm. We're a team. Our lives are supposed to be shared, aren't they? He delivered the line so reasonably it made her feel insane, selfish. She didn't have the words to fight back against his flawless reasoning. "It's mine," was all she could say, a pathetic defense. "I just need one thing that is mine." His face fell, a mask of wounded confusion. "So, I'm not enough for you?" It was the perfect trap, a question with no right answer, designed to make her the villain. She gave up the studio. A week later, they closed on a house, a beautiful bungalow with a $1.2 million price tag. Derek dropped $800,000 from his trust fund. Kayla liquidated her entire life savings and took out a loan to cover her $200,000 portion. "See?" Derek said, tapping his finger on the deed where both their names were printed. "This is ours. We are in this together." He told me he couldn't understand why she didn't look happy. All she felt, she'd later confess, was the cold, hard weight of being purchased. That night, she stood in the empty sunroom they'd once talked about turning into her new studio, and she couldn't picture it. She couldn't imagine her clients walking through the intimate spaces of their home, her professional life completely subsumed by their shared one. She kept repeating the lie to herself. This is what marriage is. It's about compromise. She didn't realize she was compromising herself into oblivion. The conversation about a baby started almost immediately, before the last of the moving boxes had even been unpacked. They had been in the new house for less than 2 weeks when Olivia made her move. Kayla was on a stepladder, trying to hang a painting, when her phone buzzed. "Kayla, dear," Olivia's voice chirped. "How are you settling into the new house?" "It's getting there," Kayla replied, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm sure it is just lovely," Olivia said, followed by a calculated pause. "You know, now that you two have a proper nest, it's really time to start thinking about the next step." Kayla knew exactly where this was going. We're we're still just adjusting to everything." "Of course, dear, but let's be realistic. You're not getting any younger. That biological clock is ticking." The words were delivered with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. "So," Olivia pressed, "when can we expect some good news?" Kayla looked around at the chaos of boxes in a house that felt like a museum and felt utterly trapped. "Derek told me about their first official family dinner as a married couple." "Kayla," he said, tried to deflect Olivia's probing with a light, breezy comment. "Oh, we're just enjoying being married for a while." But Olivia Sterling doesn't do light and breezy. She leveled a cool gaze at Kayla and said, "Well, don't enjoy it for too long," before dropping the true purpose of the dinner, a summons to Easter Sunday where the full force of the Sterling social and corporate dynasty would be present. It was, he admitted, a command performance. There were at least 15 people there whose only job was to inspect and pass judgment on the new bride. When Easter arrived, the Sterling estate was a suffocating tableau of pastel colors and forced smiles. Kayla, dressed in an approved yellow dress, was trying desperately not to make a single misstep. It was a fool's errand. They were halfway through the main course when Olivia made her move. I can see it now, her voice slicing through the polite dinner conversation. "So, when can we all expect an announcement?" Derek said that 14 pairs of eyes swiveled in perfect unison to pin Kayla to her chair. When Kayla feigned confusion, asking what she meant, Olivia clarified with a smile that was all teeth. "A baby, dear. You've been married for, 2 months now? But the next part is what haunts me. The part Derek can barely speak about." His mother leaned forward, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Surely you two have been trying. Kayla's face was a mask of crimson humiliation. Underneath the table, Derek reached for her hand, but he confessed to me it wasn't a gesture of support. It was a desperate attempt to keep her from fleeing. And while his wife was being publicly vivisected, he said nothing, not one word. He just sat there, a handsome statue, completely frozen, while Kayla mumbled something into her plate, and his mother informed the entire table that the clock was indeed ticking. He told me once he could feel the scream building in Ashley's throat, right there at the dinner table, a primal urge to tell his mother to get the hell out of their lives. But she didn't. She just tightened her grip on her wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and offered a smile that didn't touch her eyes. He confessed that the squeeze he gave her hand under the table wasn't for comfort. It was a warning, a silent, desperate command. Don't. Just get through this. Even thinking about it now makes my stomach clench. After that night, it spiraled into this grotesque ritual. Twice a month, every month, they'd sit at that polished mahogany table and his mother, Donna, would begin her assault. Sometimes it was a sly, passive-aggressive jab. Other times it was a shot straight to the heart, a casual, "Still no good news, I take it." His father, Robert, was a quieter storm, but Nathan once overheard him in his study, pontificating to some associate on the phone. A man without an heir is a man without a legacy. Nathan never told me how he responded. He never had to. Donna's campaign escalated to Wednesday check-in calls, which were nothing more than thinly veiled interrogations about the intimate functions of Ashley's body. It got so relentless that Ashley eventually stopped answering calls from that number altogether. Then, one afternoon, unpacking a box Nathan had finally brought over from a storage unit, she found it. It was buried at the bottom, beneath old yearbooks and trophies, almost as if someone had tried to make sure it was never seen again. The photograph was of a striking older woman, maybe in her late 60s, with a cascade of silver hair and the kindest eyes you could ever imagine. A tangible warmth seemed to radiate from the faded print, a feeling so utterly foreign in the cold landscape of Nathan's family. "Who is this?" Ashley asked him later that evening as he scrolled through emails. He gave the photo a cursory glance. "Oh, that's my grandmother, Eleanor, my dad's mom." When Ashley remarked on her beauty, on the fact he'd never once mentioned her, he just shrugged, his eyes already back on the screen. "She passed away back in 2016 before we met," he said. "We weren't close. Her and my dad, they had issues. But something compelled Ashley to press him. Why weren't they close? His reply was a wall of concrete. "I don't know, just family stuff." The tone he used, the finality of it, slammed a door between them. The conversation was dead. Ashley quietly placed the small, framed photo on their bookshelf. She saw a spirit in Eleanor's face that was entirely absent in Robert's. But Nathan was already gone, his voice a low murmur on another conference call. A few weeks later, Robert showed up at their house unannounced, the first for him. This wasn't a friendly visit. It was an inspection. He moved through their home like a conquering general surveying new territory, his gaze sharp and critical. And then he saw her. His eyes landed on the bookshelf, and his entire body went rigid, his focus locked on the silver-haired woman smiling from the frame. It all came back to that photograph. A ghost named Eleanor, Nathan's own grandmother, unearthed by his wife, Ashley. When she first asked him about her, a chill had entered the room. He'd muttered something about Eleanor having strange, rebellious ideas about what family and legacy were supposed to mean. The moment Ashley tried to dig deeper, he shut down completely, even turning the photograph face down on the shelf. Some things are better left buried, was the cryptic warning he gave her. But the image of Eleanor's gentle, defiant eyes was seared into Ashley's mind. She couldn't reconcile the warmth in the photo with the venom in Nathan's voice when he spoke her name. She let it go for a while, dismissing his reaction as a loyalty to ancient history. And in her world, there were more immediate battles to fight. By September, it had been 6 agonizing months, and Ashley still wasn't pregnant. The pressure from Nathan's family had morphed from a background hum into an unbearable shriek. She'd turned their life into a clinical trial, charting cycles and temperatures with a desperate scientific precision. Every month that passed felt like a personal failing. Nathan felt it too. I watched him retreat further into his work, his phone calls with Robert becoming clipped and tense. He told me about one night in early October, how he found Ashley on the bathroom floor, just staring at another stark, white, negative test, the air thick with a crushing, silent grief. He tried to hold her, to offer some empty comfort, but she just shattered in his arms. The dam broke, and everything poured out. The humiliation, Donna's invasive questions, Robert's cold obsession with his legacy. "They're breaking me, Nathan," she sobbed. And in that moment, my friend, trying to glue the pieces of his world back together, made the suggestion that sealed their fate. Maybe, maybe we should go see a doctor," he said softly. "You know, just to rule things out." She argued that 6 months wasn't that long, that they should keep trying, but he pressed, insisting it would give them answers. And more critically, it would be ammunition to get his parents to back off. He looked so tired, so beaten down. He was a man trying to shield his wife, and seeing the pain in his eyes, she finally relented. They would make an appointment. He swore they would face whatever came next together as a team. She clung to that promise like a lifeline. The appointment was with a Dr. Mason Cole, a specialist his father, Robert, had insisted was the absolute best in Austin. Ashley thought she was walking toward a solution. She had no idea she was being led straight into an ambush. The clinic was one of those hyper-sterile places trying desperately to feel like a spa, with its muted lavender walls and hushed atmosphere. It did nothing to calm the hornet's nest in Ashley's stomach. Nathan kept his hand on her knee, a study in forced calm, but the whole thing felt like a grim performance. When a nurse called out, "Mrs. Miller," Nathan gave Ashley's hand a final, firm squeeze and asked if she wanted him to go back with her. She could only nod, her voice caught in her throat. He was playing the part of her rock, the steady guide who would lead her through this terrifying new land. Dr. Mason Cole was precisely the kind of man Robert Miller would endorse. Late 50s, an offensively expensive Rolex, and an unshakable air of condescending authority. He greeted Ashley from behind a desk the size of a small boat, getting straight to business with the false familiarity of a practiced salesman. He recited the facts of their case, trying for 6 months, irregular cycles. The irregularity was true. Her cycle had always been unpredictable, but it had never been framed as a pathology before. Then came the ultrasound, a cold, invasive procedure that produced nothing but meaningless gray shapes on a screen. Nathan told me Dr. Cole barely spoke to Ashley, just mumbled technical terms to his assistant, waving away her timid questions as if she were a child. Afterwards, a nurse drew 3 vials of blood with detached efficiency. The results, the doctor announced, would be ready in a week. That week was a unique kind of hell. Ashley was a ghost in their own home, flinching every time the phone rang. Nathan, ever the dutiful husband, kept repeating his mantra, "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The follow-up was on a Thursday. They sat in those same two chairs, staring across that vast expanse of polished wood, waiting for the verdict. And then the world tilted on its axis. Dr. Cole informed them, with an almost casual finality, that the test confirmed she had polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS. He swiveled his monitor around, pointing to a series of small, dark circles on her ovaries, which he clinically referred to as a string of pearls. It was, he explained, a significant hormonal imbalance. I remember Nathan telling me about it later, his voice flat. The doctor explained how Ashley's ovaries were producing a surplus of immature follicles, which was throwing her entire system into chaos. When she finally found her voice, a whisper he could barely hear, and asked what it all meant for them. For their future, Cole delivered the blow. Conceiving naturally, he stated, would be an uphill battle. He immediately launched into a discussion of treatment protocols, a dizzying array of ovulation-inducing drugs, and the future possibility of IVF. But Nathan said that one phrase, uphill battle, seemed to lodge itself in Ashley's soul. The doctor kept using the word manageable, sketching out action plans involving vitamins and more obsessive cycle tracking. If there was no progress in another 6 months, he said, they would have to explore more aggressive options. Nathan, playing his part, squeezed her hand and told the doctor, "We'll do whatever it takes." He was trying to be the hero. But, he said, Ashley just sat there, a statue, her eyes fixed on the gray blobs on the screen that had just rewritten her entire existence. "Is it my fault?" she asked. And the way Nathan described it, her voice was choked with a shame so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. Dr. Cole was quick with a practice dismissal, assuring her that PCOS wasn't something she had caused. It just was. But to Ashley, it felt like a verdict. A life sentence for the crime of having a body that had failed. She held herself together, by some miracle, all the way down to the parking garage. The moment Nathan jogged back inside to schedule their next appointment, she finally broke. The tears came in a violent, silent torrent. She called her mom, Sharon, who knew from the first ragged sob that something had shattered. "I can't have children," Ashley cried into the phone. Now, that wasn't precisely what the doctor had said, not in so many words. But in her heart, in the wreckage of that moment, it was the only truth that mattered. Her mother's response was instantaneous, a shield against the clinical verdict. "Your worth is not measured by your uterus," Sharon told her fiercely. "You are not a broken thing." It was a mother's love trying to stitch a wound that a medical chart had just ripped wide open. By the time Nathan returned to the car, Ashley had wiped her face and claimed she was fine. He knew she was lying. That night, she called his sister Megan, searching for any port in the storm, any shred of empathy. She recounted the entire ordeal, the diagnosis, the cold medical jargon, the terrifying uncertainty. She was met with a long, deafening silence on the other end of the line. "So, this is it then," Megan finally said. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation, a closing of a file. It was an indictment, confirming that Ashley was, in fact, the problem they all suspected her to be. But the reaction from Robert was on another plane of cruelty. At Sunday dinner that week, Nathan quietly delivered the news. Robert's response was swift and brutal. "Well," he said, not bothering to look up from his steak, That would explain it. He said it with the same casual disdain one might use for a faulty appliance. After that dinner, Ashley stopped going. Nathan went alone, feeding them excuses about her being buried in a big project at work. She simply couldn't stand to see the look of vindicated disappointment in their eyes anymore. Her job became her only sanctuary. She poured every ounce of her being into the Spencer Vance condo project downtown. Spencer was a business contact of Nathan's, yes, but he was also one of the last people on Earth who still saw her as Ashley, the brilliant designer, not Nathan Miller's defective wife. But Nathan couldn't even allow her that. He insisted on attending their first major design meeting, where he systematically dismantled every creative idea Spencer proposed. He actually had the audacity to tell Spencer, a man with 2 decades of industry acclaim, to stick to the budget and let him steer the creative vision. The silence from Derek was heavy, thick with an unspoken rage you could almost taste in the air. But Austin was a Thompson, and in their world, that name was a shield. It was just another calculated move in his long game, a subtle shove to keep his wife marginalized and friendless, even in her own professional space. She knew then she'd have to catch Derek later. His ideas were brilliant, light years beyond anything Austin could ever conceive. The diagnosis had been hanging in the air for barely a week before Austin's quiet control began to take physical form. He started producing vitamins each morning. "Dr. Miller says you need these," he'd declared, rattling a small bottle. They were prenatal, he explained, to prepare her body for a future he had no intention of allowing. The bottle, however, was disturbingly blank. Its only feature was a stark pharmacy label that read, "Kayla Thompson, take one daily." He wove a convincing tale of a specialized prescription, insisting the generic store brands were useless for her supposed condition. These pills, he swore, were medical grade. They looked harmless enough, just tiny tablets of a pale, innocent pink. When she asked how long the regimen would last, his answer was chillingly vague. "For the foreseeable future," he'd said smoothly, claiming they were to regulate her hormones. It was a perfectly constructed lie, built on the foundations of her trust in the doctor and her faith in him. So she complied, swallowing a pill under his watchful gaze each morning, a ritual sealed with a kiss to her forehead. "We'll get through this," he would murmur, and she, a prisoner in a life she thought she'd chosen, believed him. Looking back now, it's clear that Kayla's first 2 years as Austin's wife were less a marriage and more a methodical campaign of erasure. A person doesn't just vanish, it's a slow, insidious tide, creeping in so gently that you're submerged before you ever realize you can no longer breathe. It started with the smallest thefts of self. At gatherings, her thoughts were expertly hijacked and replaced with his. "Kayla's been obsessed with the new zoning laws," he'd proclaim, and she would simply nod. She mastered the art of the vacant smile and the silent nod. In time, their circle of friends began to shrink. Her closest friend, Jessica, visited once in the early months of 2022, only to be met with a wall of Austin's cold hostility. "I thought this was our night," he'd said later, his voice a weapon of manufactured disappointment. Kayla never extended another invitation. That's when his mother, Linda, began her own assault, disguised as wardrobe suggestions. "Is that necklace a bit much for brunch, honey?" Linda would inquire, her tone soft but sharp, and Kayla would quietly unclasp it. By that summer, her closet had been bled of all color, leaving only a sea of beige and gray, Linda's signature palette. The vibrant woman from her wedding photos, radiant in a yellow dress, was gone. Even their intimacy, Austin later confessed to me, became a clinical, scheduled obligation, maybe once a month at most. His reasoning was always the same rehearsed line about the crushing stress of work. He would simply turn his back to her and face the wall. Kayla tried to tell herself this was normal, the inevitable cooling of a marriage. She tried to ignore the fact that his eyes seemed to look right through her. During the bi-monthly family dinners, a recurring nightmare of quiet judgment, she was treated like a ghost at the table. Linda would inquire about her health with the same sterile concern one might have for a malfunctioning appliance. Any progress, dear? That single word, progress, laid the truth bare. Her body wasn't her own, it was a project, and she was its failing manager. She would just offer a slight shake of her head, and the conversation would flow around her as if she had never spoken. It was at one such dinner, during the suffocating heat of the 2022 summer, that Linda casually deployed another name. "Have you ever met Sophia Hayes?" she asked. "A delightful girl. I hear she's doing incredible things in the Seattle tech scene." "No, I don't think I have," Kayla replied. "Oh, she and Austin were practically joined at the hip for a while. Before your time, of course," Linda added, her smile serene and cutting. Ancient history. Austin later told me his jaw clenched, but he remained silent. And Kayla, exhausted from the simple effort of existing, didn't have the strength to start digging up the bones of his past. It took her friend Jessica on a rare coffee outing in July that Kayla had to practically beg for to finally crack the facade. Seated at their usual spot, Jessica looked her dead in the eye. "When is the last time you said no to any of them?" she asked, her voice low. "Who?" Kayla whispered into her latte. "The Thompsons, Austin, any of them." Kayla just stared into her cup, because the honest answer was a terrifying blank. "I remember a woman who would argue with me for an hour over a font, a designer who told clients their ideas were garbage." "That's not fair," Kayla protested, but the words felt hollow, even to her. "Fine. When did you last wear the silver bracelet I bought you? The one you swore you'd never take off?" Kayla's gaze fell to her bare wrist. She had no memory of removing it, but it was gone. "Kayla." Jessica's voice softened, but her next words landed like a physical blow. "You're disappearing." Kayla wanted to defend herself, to justify the life she was living, but the words wouldn't come. When she reached back for a memory of feeling like herself, all she found was a cold, empty space. The chilling truth, unknown to any of us, was that Austin had sealed her fate long before he ever laid eyes on her. He told me it happened in the summer of 2018 when he was 30. A colleague, Kevin Price, announced in a board meeting that his wife was unexpectedly pregnant again. "Congratulations," his own father, Robert, had offered. Kevin gave a strained laugh. "It's a shock, to be honest. I had a vasectomy 4 years ago." Another executive chimed in. "I thought those were foolproof." "So did I," Kevin replied grimly. "Apparently they can just reverse. The doctor called it spontaneous recanalization, a 1 in 1,000 long shot." "So now I'm 45 and starting over with a newborn," he complained. For Austin, a man who viewed children as the death of the life he'd carefully built, a profound panic took hold. That 1 in 1,000 chance was an unacceptable variable. 2 weeks later, he drove to a clinic 1 state over, paid in cash, and underwent the procedure himself. He told no one, not his family, not his friends, not even me, his closest confidant, until it was far too late. Austin had a history of this, of course. He would detonate a relationship the moment a woman even hinted at wanting children. But that story from the boardroom had terrified him. So, upon meeting Kayla in 2020, a woman his parents actually approved of, he constructed the perfect cruel trap. With the vasectomy as his silent guardian, he began feeding her birth control pills, repackaged and rebranded as the very supplements meant to help her conceive. He had insulated himself from chance, creating a closed system where he was the only one who knew the rules. Every single morning, Kayla ingested one of those pills, holding on to the belief they were paving the way for a child my best friend had already made biologically impossible. He told me that by December of 2022, she had perfected the art of taking up almost no space at all. He recounted how she had slipped away from a family dinner, only to hear him talking with his father, Robert, in the hallway. Perhaps it's time you reconsider your options. Robert's voice was low and clinical. She froze, concealed by the doorframe. You've given it 2 years, he continued. No one can say you didn't give it a fair shot. They were discussing her as a failed investment. My friend was being advised to discard his wife. She had failed so completely at her primary function that even Robert, a man obsessed with legacy, was greenlighting her removal. She somehow returned to that dinner table and endured the rest of the night, her face a pale, brittle mask that, Austin admitted, he hadn't even registered. The massive corporate gala in August of 2023 took place at the very hotel where he had first met her 3 years prior. She stood there in a gray dress Linda had selected. She offered smiles to people whose names she no longer bothered to learn. Across the cavernous ballroom, Austin was deep in conversation with his father, and in all that time, he never once looked in her direction. She sat at their assigned table, utterly alone, feeling like a forgotten accessory. Inside the ladies' room, beneath the harsh hum of fluorescent lights, she finally looked at her own reflection. She saw a woman in a colorless dress with hollow eyes and shoulders perpetually braced for an impact. Her jewelry was tastefully minimal, her hair styled precisely to Linda's liking. She looked exactly like every other corporate spouse in attendance, polished, compliant, and utterly gutted. That woman was not the fiery designer who had built her own studio at 24, the one who battled contractors and wore bright colors like a declaration of war. She lifted a hand to the glass, and a stranger's hand rose to meet hers. That stranger in the mirror was her. Back in the ballroom, Austin was, by his own admission, completely oblivious. It was during the long, silent drive home that a devastating realization slammed into her. She could not recall the last time she had spoken a single word she actually meant. She could not remember who she was before she was remade into Mrs. Austin Tyler, before she became the central problem in a family that was now actively trying to solve her. Catching her own reflection in the rearview mirror, she saw the eyes of a complete stranger staring back. That fall, she began to unravel. September arrived with its oppressive Texas humidity, but Kayla felt a permanent chill deep in her bones. Lying in the dark beside Austin, she would wonder at what point she had ceased to be a person to him and had become just a problem to be managed. The call from his mother, Linda, came on a Tuesday afternoon. Kayla was in her home office. The sunroom he had once promised would be her sanctuary for creativity, but now he seemed to simmer with resentment every time a client called. "Kayla, darling, how are you feeling?" Linda began. "I'm fine." "You sound exhausted," Linda observed, the judgment a palpable thing even through the phone. "I was just thinking, The pressure from Austin's family began like a quiet tide, relentless and eroding. His mother, Catherine, would suggest to Kayla, perhaps a break from your career would do you good, for your health. The unspoken addendum hung in the air, thick and suffocating. All that ambition couldn't possibly be conducive to producing the family heir. Kayla's design work was the last piece of herself she truly owned, and now they were coming for that too. She offered only a hollow promise. I'll think about it. I only want to help, Catherine would insist, her tone as soft as the velvet lining of a beautifully crafted trap. After the call ended, Kayla would just sit, the vibrant lines of her designs blurring before her eyes, a silent scream building in her chest, a scream against their entitlement to her body, a scream that accused them of being the very source of her destruction. But her only reply was that quiet, devastating surrender. I'll think about it. Then came another mandatory Sunday dinner, an institution of passive aggression. She caught their voices leaking from the study, Austin and his father, Robert. Perhaps, Robert began, his voice a low rumble of authority. It is time to consider the other avenues. And Austin, her husband, his voice was barely a whisper as he asked, what do you mean by that? His father's reply was a clean, brutal incision. You know precisely what I mean. It has been 2 years. Condition or not, this arrangement is failing. No one would fault you, Robert concluded, twisting the blade. A heavy silence filled the space between them before Austin finally uttered the family mantra of concession. I'll think about it. In that moment, Kayla understood. It was their code for agreement. They were engineering her obsolescence. She returned to the dinner table, finished her chicken, and even managed to smile when they passed her the dessert. Beneath the polished wood of the table, however, her hands trembled so violently she had to clench them into fists. That was the night the facade finally cracked. It wasn't a single blow, but the cumulative weight of it all, the lingering echo of Robert's cold dismissal, and the terrifying vacancy she saw reflected in her own husband's eyes. It was the bone-deep exhaustion from 2 years of holding herself together. I only have his side of the story, the fractured narrative he pieced together for me. He described finding her in the shower, still in her clothes, the water just cascading over her. He said her breathing was ragged, as if a scream held captive for months was finally tearing its way out. He watched her press her forehead to the cool tile and just fold. He knocked, calling her name. Kayla, are you okay? Silence. He tried again, his voice louder. Kayla. But the woman he was calling for was already gone. The thing that truly shattered my best friend, Austin Vaughn, wasn't some dramatic, explosive fight. It was the quiet, definitive click of the bathroom lock. Think about that for a second. In their entire relationship, it was the first time Kayla had ever created a physical barrier between them. He told me he just stood there, rattling the handle, utterly bewildered. Why is the door locked? The voice that answered wasn't hers. It was a hollowed-out, distant thing. Just give me a minute. She waited until his footsteps retreated down the hall, standing under the chilling spray, her dress a second skin. When she emerged, she found Austin in bed, feigning sleep. And the reality of her situation descended on her with breathtaking clarity. Their perfect marriage had been nothing more than a stage play. And Austin wasn't her partner. He was the warden of her gilded cage. He wasn't merely a bystander to his family's campaign. He was an integral part of the machinery designed to grind her down. That November, she committed her first true act of insurrection. She walked into a downtown bank and opened a private account, one that Austin Sterling had no knowledge of. When the teller asked if she wanted to add him, her no felt like the loudest sound she had ever made. From that day on, with every client payment, she began siphoning off a small portion before depositing the rest into their shared account. $200 from one project, $500 from another. It was a slow, careful rebellion, never enough to trigger an alarm, but it was steadily growing. It was her escape fund, the seed of a future he would have no part in. The week before Thanksgiving, her mother, Karen, called. It wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration. "I'm driving up. I will see you on Tuesday." Kayla's attempts to dissuade her were futile. Karen simply rolled over them. "I'm coming." She arrived with a single small suitcase and the same protective fire in her eyes that Kayla had known since she was a child. That evening, sitting in the quiet of their own kitchen, the house felt like a sanctuary for the first time in years. "Honey," Karen began, her voice gentle, "you look like you're disappearing." Kayla attempted a laugh, but her mother took her hand, her grip firm. "No, you listen to me," she insisted. "You don't owe that family a child. You don't owe them anything at all. But if I can't give them what they want, I have no value to them," Kayla confessed, the words brittle and broken. Karen's voice grew quiet, but it was laced with steel. "Then you are worthless to the wrong damn people. Your value is not tied to extending some wealthy man's legacy. Do you understand me?" And for the first time, cutting through the noise of Austin and his family, she did. It could have been Robert's voice, a ghost still haunting the halls of her mind. It could have been the image of that locked bathroom door. Or perhaps it was the quiet power of that secret bank account, a tangible spark of a different life. She finally gave voice to her rebellion. "I can't go to their Thanksgiving." Her mother simply smiled. "Good. Let Austin be upset." And just like that, it sounded incredibly simple. For 2 long years, she had been trained to see her own self-preservation as a betrayal of her husband. But in that kitchen, she knew he was no longer the one who counted. Thanksgiving came and went. Austin drove to his parents' estate alone. Kayla and her mother ordered Chinese food and offered no apologies. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she felt the simple, profound relief of a full breath. She had no way of knowing that, in just 2 weeks, the ground beneath her feet was about to be torn away. She didn't know about the old phone, the text messages, the entire soul-crushing architecture of Austin's betrayal, dormant inside a dead piece of electronics. She only knew that she had locked a door, opened an account, and said no. These were the first fragile steps toward her freedom. She had been playing a part for an audience that had no intention of ever applauding her. And now, the show was over. The first thread of Austin's carefully woven lie came loose by sheer chance. He was in Denver for what he called a 3-day business conference, and for the first time in months, the house felt blessedly light, free from the weight of his presence. She was in his office searching for a tax document when she saw it. The bottom drawer of his mahogany desk was locked. She had seen him use one of those tiny, flimsy keys that come with assemble-it-yourself furniture to open it, and she knew exactly where he kept it, stashed in the pocket of an old winter coat he hadn't worn in a year, a detail she discovered by accident weeks before. She might have told herself it was just curiosity, that it was her house too, that she had a right. But he always pictured her hands trembling as she slid that small silver key into the lock. And there it was, beneath a stack of tax returns from 2019, neatly wrapped in a linen napkin, an old cell phone. It was his old iPhone 11. The battery was completely dead. He imagined she nearly put it back, but some primal instinct must have compelled her. She carried it to an outlet, plugged it in, and the screen flickered to life. And here's the detail that still haunts Austin. There was no password. He was sure he had wiped it, but in his haste, he had never secured it. It just opened. The screen was illuminated by a text conversation with a woman named Jessica. Austin said that when he imagines Kayla seeing that name, he can physically feel the floor drop out from under her. The date stamp was from 8 months earlier, April of 2023. The messages laid his treachery bare. Austin telling Jessica he missed her, that his marriage to Kayla was a colossal mistake his father had practically orchestrated. And then, the final, devastating blow, his own words, "It won't be for forever." "I'm working on it," another one of his texts read. When Jessica had pressed for specifics, he had simply told her to be patient. In that single instant, Kayla's entire reality must have imploded. She scrolled up, the screen a venomous river of messages, revealing months of a secret life built upon the wreckage of what she believed was her marriage. Suddenly, her hands stopped shaking. He said, it was as if a switch had been flipped inside her. A profound, chilling calm settled over her as she methodically photographed every single screen. Then she called her best friend, Chloe. "I need you here, right now." When Chloe asked what happened, Kayla's voice was pure ice. "I found something." Chloe, who lived 30 minutes away, made it in 25. Kayla didn't speak. She just handed her the phone. She watched her friend's expression shift from confusion to disbelief, then sharpen into the predatory focus of the trial lawyer she was. "Okay," Chloe said, setting the phone down on the table as if it were an unexploded bomb. "Listen to me very, very carefully. You are not to say a single word to him about this. Not one thing." "Kayla, look at me," Chloe commanded, her hands gripping Kayla's shoulders. "We have to be strategic. Men like Austin, from families like the Vaughns, they don't lose when you catch them. They lose when you construct a cage so perfectly, so airtight, that they can't lie or buy or bully their way free." Her gaze was unwavering. "Do you trust me?" Kayla nodded. "Good. Because we are going to take everything." For a brief moment, Chloe's professional mask slipped. "My mother, she endured something like this," she confessed. "When she divorced my father, her own family cut her off, called her a disgrace. I spent years watching her fight just to keep our heads above water." She took a steadying breath. "And Austin's own aunt, his father's sister, had it 10 times worse. I know this because I dated her son Tyler for a semester in law school." She then proceeded to tell Kayla the story of Sarah, who had escaped an abusive marriage back in 2005, and the price the Vaughn family had exacted for her freedom. She'd gone to her own flesh and blood, to Spencer, Nathan's father, pleading with him to intervene. He'd called her a stain on the family name and cut her out of the will, leaving her destitute. The rest of the Sterlings simply followed his lead, turning their backs on her completely. She ended up raising Tyler all by herself, juggling 2 jobs, while her son grew up watching his uncle methodically dismantle his mother's entire world. "Tyler hasn't exchanged a single word with his uncle in more than 10 years, Chloe went on, her gaze locked on Ashley. "He clawed his way up from nothing, and he despises the very ground the Sterling family walks on." In that instant, It all clicked into place for Ashley. "You think Tyler will get involved," she breathed. "He's been looking for a fight." "I'm telling you this so you grasp what's at stake," Chloe said, her tone hardening into something cold and sharp. "The Sterlings destroy women who don't fall in line. My own mother barely got out alive. Tyler's mom passed away 5 years ago, still an outcast. I will not, Ashley, let Nathan Sterling do the same thing to you." "So what do we do?" Ashley asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her friend Megan was already moving, her fingers a blur across the screen of her phone. "All right, here's the game plan. First, money. We scrutinize every account, every transaction. We trace where it's all gone. Second, medical history, specifically about the medications Spencer has been prescribing for you. And third, all communications. We need to see everything else he's been concealing." Megan clarified that some information would be simple enough to acquire legally, given that Ashley was his spouse. "But for the rest of it," she said, her eyes meeting Ashley's, "we need an expert. I have a private investigator who is second to none. Plus, my friend Jake has access to other methods." When she saw the fear in Ashley's eyes, Megan's voice grew firm. "You are not pulling anyone down with you, Ashley. You are finally letting your friends lift you up." In that moment, something inside her finally fractured. A collision of overwhelming relief and pure, unadulterated terror. "Okay," she whispered, the word escaping on a shaky breath. "Just tell me what I have to do." The initial strategy was deceptively simple. "Right now, you do nothing. Nathan comes back tomorrow. You welcome him home with a smile. You give him zero indication that anything is out of the ordinary. Do you think you can handle that?" Ashley's mind must have replayed the past 2 years with Nathan. The sterile, silent meals, the forced smiles at his family's suffocating parties. The endless nights she lay awake convinced that she was the one who was broken. She had been performing for him for years. "Yes," she said, a newfound resolve solidifying her voice. "I can do that." Megan offered a slow, approving nod. "Excellent. I'm making a call to Jake this evening." Long after her friends had gone, Ashley retrieved Nathan's old phone, her hands now completely steady, and reread his cruel, dismissive message. "This was a mistake. It won't be for forever." In that quiet moment, a part of her soul turned to ice, then crystallized into something unbreakable. For years, she'd believed she was the flaw he had to manage. She wasn't the flaw. She was the structure he intended to tear down. She plugged the phone in and placed it exactly where he had left it. From what I can gather, my friend's carefully constructed world began to unravel with the soft click of a lock. That was the sound that set everything in motion for Ashley. After closing that drawer, she returned the key to his old coat pocket, a small, silent act of insurrection. The game had shifted to one of secrets, and, for the first time, she was an active participant. She couldn't have known then about the audio files she would eventually uncover, or the real purpose of the pills, or the suffocating, intricate web of manipulation Nathan's father had been spinning. But she knew enough. She knew she wasn't going insane, and she knew this was only the start. For the following 2 weeks, Ashley became a ghost in her own home. Her lawyer friend, Chloe, had sketched out the entire operation on a cocktail napkin that night. The list was short and brutal: money, messages, and medicine. She began to drift through their house like an apparition, checking off each item. She would jimmy open drawers Nathan believed were secured and photograph the contents of every file. She was betting on my friend's hubris, or at least what she interpreted as such. In reality, it was just trust. He never conceived that his wife would be meticulously copying the entire contents of his laptop while he slept in the adjacent room. His career kept him on the move. A 3-day trip to Denver, followed by flights to Dallas and Houston, and she weaponized every single minute he was gone. The house, once a symbol of her loneliness, now felt like an active crime scene she was carefully processing. The first major break came from the bank records. The joint account, the one Nathan had established for absolute transparency shortly after they were married, painted a very different picture. Over the previous year, there had been 15 distinct wire transfers to an entity named SB Consulting. The figures fluctuated, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, but the total amounted to a nauseating $75,000. Every cent funneled to a ghost corporation in Seattle with no digital footprint. It took Chloe less than 60 minutes, using her law firm's extensive resources, to pull the corporate registration documents. The sole owner was listed as a woman named Olivia Vance, with a residential address in a luxury high-rise in downtown Seattle. And the date the business was officially registered? March of 2023. Exactly 1 month after Nathan and Ashley had a blowout argument about her needing more funding for her design studio. As Ashley stared at the documents, the figures must have felt like a gut punch. He was financing another woman's entire existence using their shared money. Using her money. $75,000 had been quietly bled from their future. At the same time, he was lecturing her about being more financially responsible, insisting the market was too volatile for her to expand her own business. And she had believed him. God, she had swallowed every single lie. She had scaled back on everything, even canceling lunches with friends, because she thought they were a partnership, building a life as a team. And the whole damn time, my best friend Nathan was attempting to construct an entirely separate life, bankrolled by the very income his wife, Ashley, was helping to earn. But it was the next discovery, a single sheet of paper from a medical clinic that truly blew everything apart. Apparently, her friend Megan had formally requested it from a facility Ashley had never known existed, a men's health center in San Antonio, nearly a 2-hour drive from their home. Nathan told me the consent document arrived in an unmarked envelope, and Ashley tore it open right there at Megan's kitchen table. I didn't learn about that document until much later, after the whole world had burned down. Spencer sat on my sofa, his face buried in his hands, and described the form that Ashley's friend had unearthed. It listed his full name, Nathan Sterling, and his date of birth, March 14th, 1985. The form was dated July 15th, 2018, when he was only 30 years old. He'd undergone a vasectomy, an older procedure known as surgical ligation. Spencer apparently highlighted it for Ashley, his voice low and serious, tracing the clinical term on the page. Spencer, who seemed to have an answer for everything, explained that it was an outdated technique. He detailed how the tubes are merely tied off instead of being cauterized, and how that results in a significantly higher chance of failure. Spencer said Ashley just looked at him, utterly shell-shocked. Then he produced a second document from the envelope. It was a page of post-operative care instructions, with a paragraph circled in red detailing the necessity of follow-up appointments. The guidelines stated he was required to return at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year after the procedure was completed. And right there, handwritten at the bottom, was a clinical note. Patient declined follow-up semen analysis. Spencer told me he never returned. He simply took for granted that it had been successful. In his mind, you have a surgery, and the surgery works. He had no clue you were supposed to return for verification that you were, in fact, sterile. I can only fathom the cold dread that must have washed over Ashley. Why wouldn't he get checked? She must have asked Spencer. And naturally, Spencer had a theory prepared. He called my friend arrogant, suggesting he likely considered it an absolute certainty. He began citing medical literature on vasectomy failure, explaining how a man's body can sometimes just repair itself, particularly in younger men like Nathan. The tubes can literally reconnect on their own. So, from Nathan's point of view, he was just going about his life under the assumption he was infertile. He had made that decision at 30, a full 5 years before he and Ashley had ever met. He signed a document, underwent a medical procedure, and simply continued on. It never would have occurred to him that his own body might have had a different agenda. He never thought he needed to confirm the results. And if that procedure had failed, if his body had silently rewired itself without his knowledge, then the pills he was giving her each morning weren't just the act of a monster. He told me, through tears, that they were his emergency plan, a private insurance policy against his own anatomy betraying them both. Spencer saw the expression on Ashley's face and immediately portrayed Nathan as a diabolical schemer who had engineered a system. This concept of a two-tiered deception became Spencer's central argument, casting my friend as some kind of manipulative genius. The whole incident with the listening device unfolded a week before Christmas. Spencer had provided Ashley with a tiny, sophisticated spy recorder and instructed her to place it inside Nathan's vehicle. He freely admitted it was a legal minefield, already strategizing for an inevitable courtroom showdown. As a lawyer, he was well aware that Texas law requires only one party's consent for a recording to be legal. But this was a zero-party consent situation. Spencer called it an atomic bomb of leverage, a tool for negotiation, not for evidence. So, that evening, while Nathan was showering, Ashley slipped into the garage, her hands trembling, and tucked the tiny device beneath the passenger seat of his Audi. The thought of her doing that just shatters my heart. 3 days later, they were all gathered in Spencer's office, listening to the playback. He said the audio was shockingly clear. The first voice belonged to Nathan's father, Richard, whose tone always carried the weight of an indisputable command. "It is time to resolve this, Nathan," he stated. "Cleanly, quietly. We present her with the house and $200,000 in cash. She signs a non-disclosure agreement, and this is concluded." On the recording, there was nothing but the low hum of the highway, a dead weight of static that stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, a voice emerged from the hiss, hollowed out and stripped of all its usual confidence. It was Derek, but a version of him his wife had never heard. "The house, though, we chose it. It's in both our names." From the other end of the line, his father, Richard, let out a laugh that was pure ice. "The house is a family asset," he declared. "We'll write her a check. She'll accept the offer, sign the documents, and disappear," Richard continued, his voice as unyielding as granite. "Olivia is already waiting. You can make the engagement public on Valentine's Day, a fresh start." Another stretch of silence passed before Derek asked the question that hung in the air. "What if she refuses to sign?" Richard's reply was instant, bone-chilling in its certainty. "She'll sign. Girls like her always do. They accept the terms you offer, and then they walk away." And with that, the tape went silent. When Megan switched off the recording in her office, the quiet that filled the room must have been crushing. Derek was being expertly maneuvered by his father, a role Richard had been rehearsing for Derek's entire life. But it was hearing him dismiss his wife as one of girls like her, that shattered something deep inside him when he later confessed the story. He understood in that moment that some betrayals leave a fracture so deep it can never truly mend, and a part of his soul simply froze over with the shame of it all. Megan later told Kayla they have no idea who they're dealing with, and Kayla could only manage a slow nod. She was on the brink of declaring a war that Derek couldn't even fathom. In the days that followed, he admitted something felt profoundly wrong. She moved through their home like a ghost, her sleep fractured, her appetite gone. She was a shell, spilling coffee because her hands trembled too violently to hold a mug steady. He'd tried to coax it out of her, but she walled him off completely. It was just 2 days after they'd listened to that horrifying recording that Megan put her foot down. "When was the last time you actually ate a meal?" she demanded. Kayla had no answer. Megan insisted on a doctor's visit, but not to Dr. Evans, the physician who had been on the Hayes family's payroll for years. She drove Kayla to a Dr. Miller, an OB/GYN, whose practice was run out of a beautifully restored Victorian home downtown. Kayla would later describe the clinic to Derek as a sanctuary, a place that smelled of lavender and calm. She dutifully filled out the new patient forms, with Megan sitting beside her like a silent sentinel. When Dr. Miller finally appeared, she was an older woman who radiated a quiet, steadying energy. For a fleeting moment, Kayla felt a sense of peace settle over her, the disquieting stillness right before a hurricane makes landfall. But the new doctor's questions were precise and probing. "When was your last menstrual cycle?" Kayla had to search her memory, finally guessing it had been 6, maybe 7 weeks. Dr. Miller then asked about nausea and exhaustion. Kayla confirmed both, but quickly wrote them off as byproducts of her overwhelming stress. The doctor suggested a routine test, a simple precaution. 10 minutes later, Kayla was perched on an examination table, her heart likely hammering against her ribs. As Dr. Miller began the ultrasound, a new sound filled the sterile room, a frantic, rhythmic thumping, a heartbeat. "You're approximately 6 weeks pregnant, Kayla," the doctor stated gently. In that instant, the floor must have dropped out from beneath her. She steadied herself on the edge of the table, insisting it was impossible that she'd been diagnosed with PCOS. "Dr. Evans told me I would have a hard time conceiving," Kayla explained, her voice trembling. Dr. Miller, however, was already pulling up her old medical records, her expression turning puzzled. "According to these lab results from 2021, she said carefully, "you have an exceptionally mild case of PCOS. It would have almost no impact on your ability to get pregnant." Kayla began to protest, but the doctor cut her off. "He overstated the condition." Or, Dr. Miller corrected, looking Kayla directly in the eye, "he lied." She then asked a question that would change everything. "What medications are you currently taking?" Kayla whispered her reply. "Prenatal vitamins, my husband. Derek makes sure I take them every single morning." The doctor's demeanor shifted instantly. "I need you to bring me that bottle." An hour later, Megan returned, holding the prescription vials she'd retrieved from their master bathroom. Dr. Miller inspected the small white pills and delivered the final, devastating blow. "This isn't a prenatal vitamin," she said, her voice firm. "This is Lostrin. It's a contraceptive." And just like that, the world as Kayla knew it was utterly obliterated. Megan was immediately on her feet, her voice ringing with outrage, using words like reproductive coercion and assault. In that sterile room, my friend Derek transformed from a husband into a monster. The first words out of Kayla's mouth were a dazed whisper. I am pregnant. A storm of confusion and horror must have been raging in her mind. Dr. Miller asked if she'd taken the pill every single day without fail. Kayla's mind flashed back to a business trip to San Antonio 7 weeks prior. In her haste to pack, she left the bottle on the bathroom counter. For 3 whole days. I missed a few, she admitted. Late October, I was traveling. It only took 3 days. Derek was completely oblivious to the drama unfolding in that downtown clinic. His wife, Kayla, was there with her best friend, Megan, and Dr. Evans had a calendar spread across her desk. The dates for conception aligned perfectly, she confirmed. Kayla just kept shaking her head in disbelief, insisting it couldn't be true. My husband, Derek, he had a vasectomy 5 years ago. She even had the paperwork to prove it. Megan and the doctor exchanged a look. And as doctor, Evans scanned the document Megan gave her. Her expression hardened into stone. The full, reckless truth was detailed right there in the medical forms. Derek was only 30 when he had the procedure. But the most damning detail was this. He had never once gone back for the mandatory follow-up screenings to confirm the surgery was successful. The doctor swiveled her monitor to show Kayla a medical website. Vasectomies have a failure rate, Kayla, she explained. And in younger men, there's a slightly higher risk of something called recanalization. The vas deferens can literally heal and form a new path for sperm. It is by no means a common occurrence. The odds are less than 1%. But the odds are not zero. The specific type of procedure Derek had chosen carries one of the higher known failure rates. By skipping the confirmations, he was operating on pure, arrogant assumption. It was Megan who finally gave voice to the unbelievable truth. So you're saying the whole thing could have just undone itself? Dr. Evans gave a solemn nod. It's a genuine medical possibility. For a reversal to happen 5 years after the fact is exceedingly rare, the doctor added. But given his age at the time, the particular surgical method used, and the complete lack of verification, it is entirely plausible. The silence in the room must have been absolute. Then Kayla asked the question that exposed the true depth of her husband's depravity. If the vasectomy might have failed, why was Derek secretly feeding her birth control? The doctor's answer was a punch to the gut. If he suspected it wasn't 100% effective, the pills were his safety net, his insurance plan. 2 separate, insidious layers of deception. Megan was incandescent with rage. And when you forgot those pills for 3 days during your trip, she said, turning to Kayla, both of his schemes failed at the same time. That's how this baby happened. Dr. Evans could only agree. The vasectomy had likely reversed itself naturally, and Kayla had missed just enough of the contraceptive for an egg to be released. It was, she said, the medical equivalent of being struck by lightning in the exact same spot twice. Kayla just sat there, hollowed out by the revelation. Her husband, my friend Derek, had built a backup for his backup. 2 life-altering deceptions, and the sole reason she was now pregnant was that she had accidentally left a pill bottle on a bathroom counter. She turned to Megan, her eyes pleading, "What am I supposed to do?" Megan didn't hesitate. "You go to his family's Christmas dinner," she said, her voice like steel, "and you tell him you know everything." Kayla left that clinic in a waking nightmare. Megan drove her back to her house, but Kayla remained in the passenger seat for 20 minutes, just staring at the home they had designed together, a place that was supposed to represent their future, their safety. She replayed the catalog of his sins in her mind. The secret recording of his father, the $75,000 he had quietly moved from their accounts, the fake medical diagnosis he'd engineered, and the pills he'd made her take every single morning. And then she thought of the child, the one thing Derek had gone to such monstrous lengths to ensure would never exist. By the time Kayla finally stepped out of the car, the fog of shock had been burned away by a cold, hard resolve. She had made her decision. She would attend that Christmas dinner, she would sit across from his parents, Richard and Sharon, and she would look Derek right in the eye. And then she would set his entire, carefully constructed world on fire. She entered the holiday season armed with a secret recording, a secret pregnancy, and a blueprint for absolute ruin. The intervening weeks were a masterclass in performance. She would smile when Derek handed her coffee in the morning, playing the part of the devoted wife. She would nod along as he talked about a new real estate venture, all the while knowing he was funneling their shared money to a woman named Lauren Blake in Seattle. For 2 long years, he had groomed her to be the perfect, uncomplicated wife who never asked too many questions. Now, she was inhabiting that role for her own purposes, methodically ticking off the days until her moment arrived. Each morning, he would pass her the small orange vial. "Don't forget your vitamins," he would say with a smile. She'd place the pill on her tongue, give him a kiss, and, the moment his car was out of the driveway, she would spit it into the trash and check the identical bottle Megan had sourced for her. It was a perfect duplicate. The same amber plastic, the same forged pharmacy label, but this one was filled with actual prenatal vitamins, the kind designed to nurture a new life, not extinguish the possibility of one. Megan had seamlessly made the switch while Derek was away on business. He was, with his own 2 hands, helping her sustain the very thing that terrified him most, and he was completely unaware. She discovered the note from his grandmother, Eleanor, on a gray, rainy afternoon, tucked away in a box of old keepsakes in a spare closet. It was a collection of items from Eleanor's estate that Richard hadn't bothered to keep. But pressed between the pages of an old leather-bound journal was a handwritten card, penned on heavy cream-colored stationery. The cursive was exquisite, a relic from a more elegant time. The note bore no name, only a date, October 2016, just a few months before Eleanor passed away. With trembling hands, Kayla read the words. "For whomever carries our family name forward with honor, legacy is not defined by blood, but by dignity. What we build in this world is less important than how we treat the people we choose to build it with." The final line was a chilling premonition. Remember this, for the men in this family are prone to forgetting. The signature was bold and clear. Eleanor Hayes. In that quiet moment, Kayla understood. Eleanor had witnessed the same chilling darkness in her own son, in the powerful family she had married into. This wasn't just a memory left behind. It was a warning sent forward in time. Kayla carefully folded the card and slipped it into her wallet, right next to her heart. The phone call that would change everything came just 3 days before Christmas. It was Karen, Derek's mother, and her voice was a weapon disguised as warmth, a sickeningly sweet poison. "Kayla, darling," she chirped, the cheerfulness a calculated cruelty. "Just so you're aware, we've invited a special guest for Christmas, Ashley Blake. She's a very dear friend of Derek's, and we thought it would be just lovely for her to join us." Kayla's hand tightened on the phone, her knuckles turning bone white. Ashley Blake. The name was a ghost on her lips. "Oh, yes, a truly charming woman," Karen continued, twisting the knife. Derek just thinks the absolute world of her. It was the final move in their cruel game, forcing Kayla to face the woman her husband was grooming as her replacement. They expected this to be the final blow, the thing that would shatter her completely. Instead, an unnerving, icy calm settled over Kayla. "That sounds wonderful," she replied, her voice dangerously serene. "I'm very much looking forward to meeting her." The silence on the other end of the line was a victory in itself. "Oh, well, good. We will see you at 6. The moment she hung up, she dialed her lawyer, Madison. For the next 2 days, they plotted a counteroffensive. Madison drafted a proposal that was nothing short of brutal, weaponizing every piece of evidence they had: the audio recording, the secret bank accounts, the birth control deception, and the falsified medical diagnosis. In Texas, drugging a spouse is grounds for a fault-based divorce, and they had him cornered. Madison walked her through the arsenal. On the morning of Christmas Eve, she handed Kayla a thick manila envelope sealed with heavy red tape. "Everything is in here," she stated plainly. "The financial records, evidence of the vasectomy, the prescription history, the audio file, and our terms. If Derek or his family attempts anything tonight, you give them this. No arguments. You show them the contents and then you leave." Kayla simply stared at the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy, a trigger for the complete demolition of Derek's carefully constructed world. "What if I can't do it?" she whispered. Madison squeezed her hand firmly. "You can. This is the moment you've been preparing for. Every time you stood up to him, every time you refused to break, that was your training for tonight." Madison had her rehearse for hours, drilling her on how to deliver the facts without a single tremor of fear in her voice. "You are not asking for their approval," Madison repeated like a mantra. "You are informing them of the new reality." That evening, Kayla stood before her mirror, doing one final run-through. She looked at the reflection of the woman Derek and his family had tried so desperately to erase, and she spoke the words into existence. "I'm not broken, I'm not ashamed, and I am done." She said it over and over until her voice was a solid, unbreakable thing. She then pulled Eleanor's note from her wallet. "Legacy isn't blood, it's dignity." She slipped it into the pocket of the defiant red dress she had chosen. It felt like Derek's own grandmother was lending her the strength to finish this. And then it was time. She put on that red dress, gave her reflection one last determined look, and picked up the envelope. It must have felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She drove directly to the Sterling family fortress in Westlake Hills, the same opulent house where she had been forced to swallow her own self-worth more times than she could count. She knew this was the end of the line. She would either fracture into a million irreparable pieces, or she would walk out of that house a free woman. From what everyone says about that night, Kayla had no intention of leaving her freedom to chance. Derek saw himself as the king in his castle, but he was about to learn his queen held all the power. Model. To understand a man like Nathan Walker, you have to start with his kingdom. That night, the Walker estate was a masterpiece of deception, a sprawling limestone palace set ablaze with what he called a grotesque fantasy of light. When Ashley guided her sedan up the long, winding drive just past 6, her headlights sliced across manicured lawns and ancient oaks, dripping with a galaxy of tiny, twinkling bulbs. It was breathtakingly perfect, a scene meticulously crafted to look like a dream. A colossal wreath of magnolia and rich velvet hung on the front door, a welcome straight from the pages of a glossy architectural digest. It was all part of the set. Nathan had been expecting the old Ashley, the one conditioned to shrink, to fold herself into the smallest possible space. But he hadn't counted on the note tucked away in her coat pocket from her friend, Eleanor. He watched her get out of the car and saw that familiar, self-effacing instinct flicker and die. Inside the opulent Austin home, the chill wasn't just in the December air. Ashley wasn't there for a holiday party. She was there to watch a dynasty self-destruct. The atmosphere, Nathan later recalled, was thick with the scent of old money and fresh betrayal. 22 guests milled about, a curated audience from his world, every one of them seeing Ashley as nothing more than a temporary fixture. And then, standing by the bar, she saw him. Mark, the very man whose career Nathan had systematically dismantled to secure a coveted project. Mark offered a hesitant nod. She returned it, her expression unreadable. A server offered a flute of champagne. She accepted the glass, but let the bubbles go flat, her fingers wrapped tight around the stem. Her role tonight was that of a silent observer, committing every calculated smile and hollow laugh to memory. It was then that she saw her, poised by the grand fireplace. Spencer. She was statuesque, a vision in an emerald gown that was worth more than a down payment on a house. It wasn't the dress, though. It was the earrings that made Ashley's blood turn to ice. Antique emeralds, framed in a sunburst of diamonds. She recognized them instantly from a faded photograph on his mother's bureau. They had belonged to Nathan's great-aunt Carol. Placing them on Spencer was more than a gesture. It was a calculated strike from his mother, Karen. It was a formal declaration. This is the woman who belongs here now. You are being methodically erased. Nathan watched his wife's face settle into a flawless, impenetrable mask. Spencer turned, her practiced hostess smile faltering for a fraction of a second as she registered who was watching her. "You must be Ashley," she cooed, her voice a syrupy blend of condescension and feigned warmth as she extended a manicured hand. "It is just so lovely to finally meet you." It was the voice of a woman absolutely convinced the game was already over. And she had won. The handshake was solid, unwavering. Spencer had no idea she was pressing the flesh with the woman who was about to orchestrate her spectacular social demise. "It's a pleasure," Ashley replied, and to Nathan's bewilderment, her tone was utterly sincere. Spencer was never the primary target. She was merely collateral damage in a war Nathan had been waging his whole life. In that moment, the great front door swung open again, and his mother Karen's voice cut through the polite din. "Caleb, what a wonderful surprise." And there, framed in the doorway, stood Caleb Walker, Nathan's estranged cousin. At Caleb's side, her hand resting confidently on his arm, was Ashley's lawyer, Madison. The real guests had finally arrived. Nathan saw a flicker of profound relief cross his wife's face before the mask slammed back into place. He stepped out from a side hallway, the smug satisfaction draining from his features as he saw his cousin. "Caleb," Nathan managed, the name a stone in his throat. "Didn't realize you were on the list." Caleb's smile was pure, uncut poison. "Madison was kind enough to invite me," he said, his tone deceptively light. "I hope that's not an issue." It was Nathan's father, Robert, who interjected, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Nonsense. Family is always welcome." But the glare he shot his son was murderous. Caleb's very presence was a blight on the family's carefully curated image, a living embodiment of a scandal they had spent a fortune to bury. The tension in the room became a physical thing. When dinner was announced, the seating chart was its own form of cruelty. They placed Ashley in a cage built for one, right between Nathan and his mother. But her reinforcements, Madison and Caleb, were seated directly opposite, too far for conversation, but close enough to form a silent, unbreachable line of defense. Spencer was given the seat of honor next to Robert, the place that, by all rights, should have been Ashley's. As the first course arrived, the air filled with the empty, self-congratulatory chatter of the insulated elite. It was then that Robert Walker stood. He tapped his crystal water glass with a steak knife, and the piercing chime sliced through the noise, demanding absolute silence. The room froze. Every single gaze swiveled to the head of the immense mahogany table. "Thank you all for joining us," Robert began, his voice saturated with the easy, arrogant power of a man who had never been told no. "It's a joy to be surrounded by our dearest friends. And tonight, to kick things off, Nathan has an announcement he'd like to share." He sank back into his chair, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. In unison, 22 heads turned toward Nathan. He later admitted that the smile he wore felt like cracking porcelain. He rose, cleared his throat, and retrieved a thick manila folder from the briefcase at his feet. He could practically hear the frantic drumming of Ashley's heart from across the table. He placed the folder on the polished wood in front of her. The silence was a crushing weight. "Ashley," Nathan said, his voice resonating with theatrical gravity, "I believe it's time for some honesty. Our marriage is finished. It has been for quite some time. To that end, my lawyer has prepared a final settlement. You'll receive the house, $200,000, and in return, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. It's more than generous. All you have to do is sign." He pushed the folder across the table, his eyes vacant and cold. "Let's end this with dignity. Tonight." Her name, Kayla Sterling, was printed in bold on the tab. A collective, silent gasp was drawn from the room. They were no longer guests at a party. They were witnesses to a public execution. His mother, Karen, radiated pure triumph. Spencer had gone sheet white, and Robert, the father who had orchestrated the entire evening, was incandescent with rage. His chair shrieked against the hardwood floor as he shot to his feet. "Nathan!" he hissed through a clenched jaw. "Our agreement was that you would handle this matter in private." But Nathan wasn't listening to his father. He was fixated on his wife. "I am handling it," he retorted. "You are creating a spectacle," Robert seethed. "This was not the plan." Nathan's response was ice. "I'm completing the plan." Nathan's voice rose, edged with a cruelty he would later confess he savored. He was determined to shatter her, to grind her dignity into dust in front of the very people whose approval she had once so desperately craved. He was banking on a full-scale collapse, on sobs, on pleas, on her scrambling to sign the papers and flee in shame. But when Ashley lifted her eyes to her lawyer, Madison, she saw nothing but calm, unflinching steel. And that was the moment Derek told me the world tilted on its axis. Across the expanse of polished mahogany, Kayla's lawyer, Madison, reached into a briefcase and produced a single, thick manila envelope. She didn't speak, just slid it across the table toward Kayla, a silent, heavy offering. "Everything you need is in there," Madison finally said, her voice a low thrum in the dead air. In that moment, Derek said you could feel the collective breath of 24 people being held. And for the first time that night, the smug, ironclad confidence on his face began to rust. Derek watched his father, Austin, transition from simmering rage to a wide-eyed animal panic. Kayla's fingers closed around the envelope. Derek remembered her saying later that it felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained the mass of Madison's entire 2-week investigation. With excruciating slowness, she cracked the seal, making every single person in that opulent dining room wait on her. The first thing she retrieved was a handwritten note, the one from her best friend Eleanor that had become her spine for this entire ordeal. She unfolded the note with care, laying it on the table as a stark counterpoint to the insulting settlement offer Derek's lawyer had drafted. Then, her hand disappeared back into the envelope. "Now, let me show you what else I have," she said, and the tremor that had been in her voice was gone, replaced by something cold and clear as steel. Her eyes swept over Derek, his father Austin, his mother Karen, and the 22 other guests, now a captive audience of gaping faces. Then she smiled. It was a smile, Derek recalled, that held no warmth at all. Ignoring his own meticulously prepared folder, she drew out the first document. It was a bank statement, crisscrossed with the aggressive yellow of a highlighter, detailing 15 separate wire transfers to an entity named AB Consulting LLC. "This," Kayla announced, holding the paper aloft for all to see, "represents $75,000 that was moved from our joint savings into a shell company owned by Ashley Blake." She turned her gaze directly to Ashley. The color drained from Ashley's face as if a plug had been pulled. "She's the woman my husband has been financing for more than a year," Kayla continued, her voice ringing with indictment. "The woman he intended to marry the moment he was rid of me." She placed the statement down, a verdict delivered, and reached back into the envelope. "And this," she said, producing the next damning page, "is a signed consent form from a men's health clinic down in San Antonio. The name of the patient is Derek Austin Sterling. The procedure was performed on July 15th, 2018. The procedure listed," she paused, letting the words hang in the air, "is a bilateral vasectomy." She sent the form gliding to the middle of the table. "My husband had a vasectomy 5 years ago when he was 30. He made the choice to never have children, and he deliberately chose never to tell me." A tidal wave of gasps and sharp intakes of breath washed over the room. Derek said his own face felt like a plaster mask, cold and gray. Unrelenting, Kayla's hand went back to the envelope. "This," she said, holding up a standard issue orange prescription bottle, "was given to me by my husband every morning for 2 straight years. He claimed they were prenatal vitamins to help us conceive the child he knew was impossible." She set the bottle on the table with a soft click. "They are not prenatal vitamins. The prescription is for Lostrin, a common birth control pill. He was actively drugging me every single day." The room descended into a frantic chorus of whispers. Kayla let the noise swell before she produced the final item, a small USB drive. "And this," she said, holding it between 2 fingers, "is a recording of my husband and his father Austin, mapping out precisely how they plan to dispose of me." With a nod from Kayla, Madison placed a small Bluetooth speaker on the table. Kayla handed her the drive. A moment later, the chillingly familiar voices of Austin and Derek Sterling filled the dining room. A poison poured into the silence. "This needs to end, Derek." Cleanly, quietly. "We offer her the house and $200,000. She signs the non-disclosure. You walk away a free man by Valentine's Day." Then Austin's voice, cutting and pragmatic. "What about the house? Her name is on the deed, isn't it?" "The house is non-negotiable. It stays in the family. We buy her out. She accepts the cash, signs the papers, and she disappears. Ashley is waiting. You can announce the engagement on Valentine's Day. I wasn't in that room, but Derek described it to me later. He said, hearing those words play back to a frozen audience of 22 of their closest friends and family was the most brutal silence he had ever experienced. His father, Austin, looked like he'd seen a specter. Derek's face was a locked down fortress, but I know him. A firestorm was raging inside. His dad, Austin, looked utterly deflated, a ghost at his own table. Then Kayla pushed her chair back, the sound scraping violently against the floor, and rose to her feet. "My name is Kayla Walsh," she declared, her voice thick with fury as she formally accused them of 2 years of systematic coercion and fraud. She was far from done. After letting her accusations settle into the horrified silence, she pulled out the last piece of paper from her arsenal. It was a medical report from a Dr. Emily Evans, and she had to raise her voice to be heard over the rising tide of shock in the room. "There's one more thing," she called out, her eyes locked on Derek. The report in her hand confirmed she was 8 weeks pregnant. The room, Derek told me, didn't just explode. It detonated. It was impossible, and every single person there knew it. The vasectomy, his secret weapon, had failed. He explained it to me later, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Recanalization. A 1 in a million medical anomaly where the body simply repairs itself. He never found out because his own damn pride wouldn't let him go back for the follow-up tests. The pills he fed her were his cruel, twisted insurance policy against fate. But on a recent work trip, she had forgotten to pack them. In a single moment of forgetfulness, both of his intricate, layered deceptions collapsed at once. Derek went sheet white. His mother, Karen, could only whisper the word no over and over, a desperate, useless prayer. Derek told me Ashley Blake was trembling so violently she struggled to remove her emerald earrings. She dropped them on the tablecloth, priceless family heirlooms, and declared she wanted nothing to do with their vile family. She looked at them all, called them monsters, and fled the room. Then, Kayla brandished that final report from Dr. Emily Evans like a victory flag. 8 weeks pregnant. The chaos in the room was absolute. She had to practically shout to explain the biological miracle. Derek's vasectomy had, against all odds, spontaneously reversed. It was a medical fluke, but one Derek would have been well aware of if his arrogance hadn't prevented a simple checkup. The daily birth control was his clandestine safety net. But she missed a few pills on a business trip, and his entire universe of lies came undone. She stared directly into his soul, he said, and uttered the words, "I'm pregnant," with the very child he had gone to such monstrous lengths to prevent. That's when his own cousin, Evan, rose from his chair. He announced that he would testify, not just about Derek, but about decades of hidden abuse at the hands of the family patriarch, Austin. Evan looked at Kayla and swore he wouldn't stand by while the family destroyed her life as they had tried to destroy others. As Austin's face went a dangerous shade of purple, Evan simply held his gaze. At that cue, Kayla's lawyer, Jessica, stepped forward and handed her a new folder. It was time to state her terms of surrender. First, she wanted the house, the entire $1.2 million estate, free and clear. Next, a sum of $425,000 for damages related to the fraud and abuse. And for Derek, there was child support, mandated by Texas state law, $8,500 a month or 20% of his gross income. She placed the settlement agreement directly in front of Austin. If they signed, she would forego pressing criminal charges for assault, which, under the law, is exactly what drugging her was. They were given 48 hours to comply before she took the entire story to every news outlet in the city. Her gaze swept over the 22 stunned guests one last time. "Merry Christmas," she said, her voice dripping with ice. Then she turned and walked away. Her lawyer, Jessica, fell into step behind her, the sharp click of their heels on the hardwood, the only sound as Derek's carefully constructed empire crumbled into dust. He told me Kayla never once looked back. She apparently maintained her composure until the doors of Jessica's car were locked. And then the dam finally broke. But what poured out of her wasn't sadness. It was pure, unadulterated relief. 2 years of being manipulated, gaslit, and drugged came shuddering out of her in ragged sobs. Jessica remained silent, letting her client purge the poison. The lawyer had already armed her with the only words that mattered. "You are not asking for a single thing. You are telling them exactly how this is going to be." Kayla had walked into that house a hostage and walked out a revolutionary. She could never return there, not to the beautiful home where every memory was now tainted by Derek's profound betrayal. Jessica understood that without a word being said. She just drove, one hand resting on the center console in a gesture of silent solidarity as they moved through the quiet, sleeping city. It was Christmas Eve in Austin. Kayla would later say it felt like she was seeing her own city for the very first time, noticing the warm glow of lights in windows she'd never seen before. Jessica drove her to a sleek downtown apartment, a clean, spare space that offered a view of a brand new world. The moment Jessica got her settled on the couch with a glass of water, the crash came. The righteous adrenaline that had fueled her confrontation evaporated, leaving her feeling scraped out and shaking uncontrollably. She had just detonated her own life, and now she had to stand in the quiet fallout. Jessica gently wrapped a heavy wool blanket around her shivering shoulders. "You did it," she whispered, and it was the highest praise. Kayla could only nod, words failing her. She had faced down Derek, his mistress Ashley, and his terrifying father Austin, armed with nothing but the unvarnished truth. And then the phone began its assault, a relentless barrage of calls and texts, first from Derek, then from Austin. Derek's initial text was just pathetic, a weak plea that read, "We need to talk. This is insane." It was the whine of a bully who'd just been punched in the mouth. Austin's message, however, was pure, distilled menace. "You have made a very serious mistake." Kayla's lawyer, Jessica, saw the texts and her expression turned to ice. She instructed Kayla to block every single member of the Sterling family. For a second, Kayla wavered. But she knew this was no longer a negotiation. It was a war. "From this moment on, all contact goes through me," Jessica stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. And so Kayla did it. She blocked Derek, she blocked Austin, she blocked Ashley. The immediate, profound silence was almost jarring. A beat later, a new text buzzed through, this one from her friend Mike, who was still at the house. His message said that Austin had stormed out about 20 minutes after she left, speaking to no one. Derek, however, had remained behind, where he'd smashed a glass against a wall and started screaming at his mother. The guests were already talking, spreading the story. Mike's final text said everything. "You were absolutely incredible." When Kayla showed the text to Jessica, the lawyer gave a grim, satisfied nod. "Good," she said. "The more witnesses there are, the less power they have to control the narrative." This was no longer a private family secret they could intimidate into silence. 22 people now knew the unholy truth. Austin Sterling couldn't spin this story. Not when half of Austin's high society, a group that traffics in gossip like its currency, had been sitting in that room. Kayla knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that by Christmas morning, their family scandal would be the most sought after story in town. A day earlier, that thought would have shattered her, but now it was her shield. The secret was no longer her burden to carry. Jessica handed her a cup of hot tea and told her the only goal for the night was to get through it. Survival was now the only thing that mattered. With the ceramic warm against her palms, Kayla finally gave voice to the fear haunting her. She would raise this baby alone. Jessica's reply was instant, a shield against the dark. "You can," she insisted, "and you will not be alone. You're not." Jessica ticked off the names of her support system. Her own mother, a friend named Michael, Jessica herself. "You have a squad, Kayla." Tears welled up again, but this time they were born of relief. "I'm gonna be a mom," she breathed. She surrendered to sleep right there on Jessica's sofa, an exhaustion so deep it felt bone-weary. Yet, she was calmer than she had been in years. She'd arrived for dinner a wife they thought they could break. She left a mother, a survivor. That was the night Kayla finally allowed herself to draw a full breath. She had no way of knowing she was carrying a son. Nor could she have known that in 3 short weeks, another Hawthorne family secret was about to claw its way into the light. One his mother, Eleanor, had locked away in legal iron. And when that secret finally broke, it became clear Eleanor had been waiting for someone exactly like Kayla, a true fighter. That evening, crashed on her friend Jessica's couch, she felt a profound sense of safety. For the first time in an age, she slept until morning. The call from Derek and his lawyer came on December 26th. When Jessica's phone buzzed, a quick glance at the screen was all it took before her eyes met Kayla's. "It's him," she stated, her voice unnervingly calm. Kayla placed her mug on the table, her hands perfectly still. Jessica activated the speaker. "This is Jessica Meyer." The man on the other end had the smooth, expensive voice hired to make problems disappear. "Miss Meyer, my name is Richard Brennan, representing Derek Hawthorne. My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms." Jessica's face was a mask of neutrality. "Continue." The lawyer detailed the offer: the house in Clarksville and $200,000, contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement and dropping everything. Jessica let the insulting offer hang in the dead air for a beat before responding with a single glacial word. "No." Brennan was audibly stunned. "I beg your pardon?" But Jessica was prepared. "Your client drugged my client for 2 years. That's felony assault under Texas Penal Code 22.01. If a deal isn't reached by 5 p.m., a police report will be filed." After a silence thick with what one can only assume was frantic recalculation, Brennan's tone was stripped of its arrogance. "What are your terms?" Jessica laid them out with surgical precision. Full ownership of the $1.2 million home, $425,000 in damages, $8,500 monthly in child support, and a total relinquishment of Derek's parental rights. The demand was unequivocal. Kayla would retain sole custody, and Derek's name would not appear on the birth certificate. He would be legally erased. In return, no criminal charges would be filed, and both would sign the NDA. Brennan stammered that he needed to call back. He did, in under 2 hours. "We accept," was all the attorney said. "The documents will be drafted by January 10th. The following 2 weeks were a maelstrom of legal correspondence. Jessica guided Kayla through every clause, ensuring she understood the fortune she was gaining and the silence she was promising. The NDA meant her story could never officially be told. But she had already told 22 people on Christmas Eve. The truth was already loose in the world. The NDA was nothing more than Warren Hawthorne's pathetic attempt to cage the narrative. On the 10th of January, Kayla sat in Jessica's office, signing her name repeatedly. Derek, predictably, was absent, his signature arriving by courier. "It's done," Jessica confirmed. Kayla glanced at the folder's label. It read, Kayla Miller, not Hawthorne. Miller. She was untethered. She returned to the Clarksville house the next day to find Derek had already stripped it of his presence. The designer suits, the computer, the photographs of him with his father at corporate galas. The house felt cavernous without his brother's ego filling the space, but it also felt lighter, breathable. Her mother drove up from San Antonio, and together they painted the nursery a tranquil sage green. They ordered a white crib, and a friend assembled the changing table while Kayla sorted through boxes of infant clothes. A friend had mailed a huge box filled with tiny outfits and plush blankets. "You are going to be such a good mom," her mother said, carefully folding a onesie decorated with a cartoon dinosaur. Kayla looked at this woman who had raised her single-handedly, working 2 jobs without a single complaint just to give her a future. "I really hope so," Kayla whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her mother offered a smile that conveyed everything. "I know so." In mid-January, Kayla had a checkup with Dr. Evans. The ultrasound was perfect, revealing a steady heartbeat. "Want to know the gender?" the doctor asked, her eyes on the screen. Kayla managed a slow, deep breath and nodded. "Yes," she managed, her voice a fragile thread. The doctor beamed. "It's a boy." A son. Derek was going to have a son. She drove home in a state of wonder, one hand resting on her stomach, her mind racing with all the things she had to teach him. How to be kind, how to be resilient, and how to recognize the danger in men like his father and run. She made a silent vow that he would know nothing but security and love. She would teach him that a true legacy isn't built on a surname or wealth, but on how you treat others with respect. That night, she slept more soundly than she had in 3 years, since before her world collided with the toxic orbit of the Hawthorns. She slept in her bed, in her house, their son growing safely inside her, the future an uncharted open sea. She was completely unaware that Eleanor Hawthorne had left her one last, stunning surprise. She didn't know that a thick envelope from a Dallas law firm was already on its way, carrying an explanation for everything. And this next part, this is where the story pivots into the unbelievable. This is where Austin would learn that the mother he had lost had recognized the monster in her own family long before anyone else did. 3 weeks after that Christmas from hell, a letter arrived. And as Kayla read it, Austin finally understood. His mother hadn't just been worried. She had set a trap for the future. On a bitter January afternoon, Kayla was in the nursery, folding impossibly small clothes for their baby, when the mail truck rumbled by. On the porch sat a heavy certified envelope. The return address was an unfamiliar firm, Bernard Klein and Associates, Dallas. Her stomach plunged. She was certain it was another legal salvo from Derek's father. Kayla ripped it open, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. The letter began, "Dear Ms. Miller, I am writing to inform you of your designation as guardian and trustee of the Eleanor Hawthorne Trust, established in 2016." She read the words aloud, her voice hollow. "As the mother of Derek Hawthorne's biological child, you now assume responsibility for this trust. his mother's name, and Kayla's. The reality of it felt completely fractured. The letter instructed her to contact the office to review the trust's contents. Kayla reread the sentences, but the words refused to connect. Guardian, trustee, the Eleanor Hawthorne Trust. It made no sense. Austin's mother, Eleanor, had died in 2016. Kayla had never met the woman. Austin kept a single, faded photograph of her hidden in a drawer. How could his mother have created a trust for a grandchild who wasn't even conceived? How could she have possibly known? Kayla was dialing her best friend Jessica in an instant. She just said the words. I got a letter from a Dallas lawyer. It's about a trust from Derek's mom. Jessica, hearing the sheer panic, simply replied, I'm on my way. Do not sign a single thing until I get there, she commanded. 2 days later, the three of them were on the road to Dallas. Jessica refused to let Kayla face this alone, a fact for which Austin was deeply grateful. They arrived on the 30th floor of a glass skyscraper that reeked of generational wealth. A receptionist led them to a conference room overlooking the sprawling city. The lawyer, Bernard Klein, was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of eyes that had seen everything. He shook Kayla's hand firmly, then Austin's, before opening a thick leather-bound binder. Ms. Miller, he started, I have administered the Eleanor Hawthorne Trust since its inception in March of 2016. He explained, Mrs. Hawthorne came to me 8 months before she passed. She was unshakable in her desire to create an irrevocable trust for her first grandchild. Austin sat there, stunned into silence. His mother's attorney looked directly at him. She was incredibly insistent. She wanted to ensure that if she ever had a grandchild, its financial security would be completely insulated from the Hawthorne family. Derek Walker sat frozen, the plush leather of the armchair suddenly feeling like a cage. His breath caught somewhere in his chest as his friend Austin stared, utterly dumbfounded, at the man across the mahogany desk. It was Kayla, his wife, who finally gave voice to the question hanging in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. Why? The question was a whisper, but it landed with the force of a shout. Mr. Miller, the estate lawyer, a man who had seemed carved from granite just moments before, let out a long, slow breath. The hardness in his eyes softened into something that looked like pity. Eleanor, your mother, he said, his gaze fixed on Derek, told me her son, Warren Hawthorne Walker, had become a man she no longer recognized. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. His own father. She described the family as toxic, Miller continued, his voice low and even. She said she would never trust them with a child. So, she liquidated everything she had, every penny of her own inheritance and life savings, and she constructed a financial firewall that neither Warren nor you, Derek, could ever breach. Kayla leaned in, her knuckles white where she gripped the arms of her chair. So, what does that mean exactly? Mr. Miller met her gaze without a flicker of hesitation. The trust is currently valued at $580,000. It will continue to accrue interest until the day the sole beneficiary turns 25. $580,000? It was an impossible number. A lifeline thrown across decades by a woman Derek barely remembered. A ghost who had somehow reached into the future to save a grandson she would never meet. Derek could almost see her, this phantom of a mother, recognizing the deep-seated poison in her own bloodline and deciding to build an ark for a child who wasn't even a whisper of a thought. As if on cue, Mr. Miller slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the polished wood. It was sealed with a dark wax stamp. "Mrs. Walker also left this," the lawyer said. "It's for the person who would raise her grandchild. My instructions were to give it to you when the time came." Derek watched, paralyzed, as Kayla's hands, trembling almost imperceptibly, reached for the letter and broke the seal that had held for over a decade. The letter inside was covered in an elegant, flowing script that seemed to dance across the page. It began, "To whoever is raising my grandchild. If you are reading this, it means my son, Warren, did not succeed in erasing me completely. It means that, against all odds, my grandchild exists. I cannot know you, but I pray you are strong." The script continued, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall she had built around their future. "I pray you are kind. And most of all, I pray you understand that the Walker name is not a gift. It is a weight." She wrote of the exact moment she created the trust, the day she finally accepted that her own son, Derek's father, would forever use cruelty as his primary tool of control. "I saw what he did to his own sister. I saw the way he was raising Derek. I knew any child of his would need an escape route. This money is not from Warren. It is not for Derek." The letter stated a stark and painful truth. "It is from me. Please, use it to give my grandchild a future. Use it to give them freedom. Do not let the Walkers dictate who this child becomes. A legacy is not about blood. It is about dignity. It is about choosing compassion when power is easier. It's about building something that lasts, not because of a family name, but because it is fundamentally good. Raise my grandchild to be better than we ever were. That is my only request. With hope, Eleanor Owen Walker." When Kayla finally looked up from the page, silent tears were carving tracks down her cheeks. And in the profound quiet of that lawyer's office, the full weight of his mother's sacrifice crashed down on Derek. She had known all along. She had seen with perfect, devastating clarity the man her husband would become. And she had played the only card she had left. She had built a fortress of love and money around a baby she would never hold, betting everything on the hope that someone good, that Kayla, would one day be standing there to receive the keys. Their friend Jessica, who had come for support, found Kayla's hand under the table and squeezed it. Mr. Miller allowed the silence to stretch, giving them space to breathe. At last, Kayla found her voice. "What do I do now?" she asked him, her voice thick with emotion. "You sign the papers," the lawyer said gently. "You officially accept the role of trustee for your son. The legal framework of this trust is impenetrable. Warren and Derek have zero claim to it. They can never touch a single dime. It is yours to manage for him." And just like that, suspended in the air between them, was the name. Connor. They hadn't dared say it out loud to each other yet, but hearing the lawyer speak of their son while Eleanor's letter lay on the desk, it settled into place. It felt right. Kayla picked up the pen and signed every single page, her signature firm and clear. Jessica co-signed as the witness. On the long, quiet drive home, she finally turned to Derek. "So, where did Connor come from?" Kayla watched the streetlights streak past the window. "It was her middle name. Eleanor Owen Walker. I just changed it a little," she said softly. "I wanted a piece of her to be with him. She's the one who saved him. It felt right that his name should always be a reminder of who his true protector was. Not the Walker men, but the woman who saw this entire disaster coming from 30 years away." Derek reached over and squeezed her hand. A silent, perfect agreement. Eleanor Walker had been dead for 8 years, but in that car, Derek felt her presence as surely as if she were sitting beside them. It was as if she had personally built a bridge from his family's toxic, broken past directly to his son's bright, protected future. He made a silent vow to her then and there. He would raise Connor exactly as she had asked. He would be raised with dignity, with kindness, and with the unshakable knowledge that a last name doesn't define you. What defines you are the choices you make, the people you fight for, the love you give when there is absolutely nothing to be gained. Connor would know that. They would make damn sure he did. But while Kayla was meticulously building the foundations of their new life, Derek's old one was being razed to the ground. The details came to him later, in bits and pieces from friends who witnessed the collapse. He had no desire to watch the dumpster fire up close. He had Connor to think about now, a life that would be intentionally and completely separate from the Walkers. But karma, as it turns out, always collects its debts. And it was coming for his family with a vengeance. That February, a man named Austin Cole walked into a Walker Properties board meeting flanked by a forensic accountant, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. The binder contained irrefutable proof that Derek's father, Warren, had been systematically embezzling from the company for 3 straight years. Over $300,000 siphoned from client retainers and corporate accounts had been funneled away. The investigation revealed that the vast majority of it went directly to his mistress, a woman named Olivia Blake. That $75,000 Kayla had found was, as it turned out, just walking around money. The rest had been paying for the lie. The luxury sports car, the designer suits, the entire facade of a successful man. Austin had quietly initiated the audit right after that catastrophic Christmas dinner, the night Kayla had systematically laid out the evidence of Warren's infidelity in front of half the town's social elite. He'd never trusted Warren, having watched for years as he steamrolled his own son and treated everyone around him like pawns in his personal chess game. For a man like Warren Walker, who built his world on control and intimidation, the walls were finally closing in. With crucial information provided by Derek himself, Austin had pieced together the entire scheme. On March 5th, the board brought down the hammer. Warren tried to dismiss it all as a series of clerical errors, but the evidence was a tidal wave. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and a damning email chain between Warren and Olivia discussing their finances. The vote to remove him was unanimous. He was out. The board then handed the entire unredacted file over to the district attorney's office. On the same night that Warren Walker's carefully constructed world was officially declared a crime scene, Derek told me Kayla felt their baby kick for the very first time. A small, reassuring flutter from a child who was finally completely safe. She was free, but the Walker family name was now officially radioactive. Warren's own father, the patriarch of the dynasty, scrambled to do damage control. But it was a futile effort. The story of that Christmas dinner had already become the stuff of local legend. With 22 witnesses, a scandal like that has legs. Now, his son's spectacular fall from grace and subsequent embezzlement charges were front-page news. Major contracts began to vanish overnight. Investors, smelling blood in the water, were calling for the old man's head. By April, the board politely suggested that it was time for Mr. Walker to retire. He fought it, of course, threatening lawsuits and calling in decades-old favors. But Derek, working from the inside, had already secured the necessary votes. On April 22nd, The old man announced he was stepping down. In a move that shocked everyone, the board named his replacement as the new CEO, Derek. And just like that, the empire Warren had spent his life preparing to inherit was now being run by the son he had spent a lifetime trying to break. In a parallel drama, Olivia Blake, the mistress at the center of the financial storm, filed for an emergency restraining order against Warren. A mutual friend, Ben, told me that Warren, stripped of his power, had become unhinged. He was obsessively stalking her, appearing at her apartment at all hours, sending bizarre and unsettling gifts. She had blocked his number and changed her locks, but his relentless pursuit had terrified her. A judge granted the order in less than 48 hours. 500 feet, zero contact. Ben said she was already preparing to file a civil suit to reclaim some of the money. Next to fall was the family doctor, Raymond Vance. His reckoning came in May. Kayla's friend, Sarah, had filed a detailed complaint with the state medical board back in January. She laid out everything: the fabricated infertility diagnosis, the birth control pills prescribed as prenatal vitamins, a long list of betrayals committed as a personal favor to his powerful friend, Warren Walker. The board launched a full-scale investigation. They reviewed Kayla's actual medical history, interviewed her new team of doctors, and subpoenaed years of Dr. Vance's patient files. By May, the verdict was in gross medical malpractice and a litany of ethical violations. They suspended his license to practice medicine on the spot. By June, that suspension became a permanent revocation. He was done, his career finished. When Sarah called to give Kayla the news, Kayla began to cry. Not for that monster, but for all the other women he might have harmed, all the other lives he might have damaged in service to the Walker throne. Another pillar of Warren's corrupt kingdom had been reduced to rubble. And as the Walker world imploded, Kayla's was being built, stronger and more beautiful than ever. In March, she won a massive contract to design the interior of a new boutique hotel downtown. As it happened, the owner had been a guest at that infamous Christmas dinner and had been profoundly moved by her courage. By April, she had signed 2 more major clients. It was a beautiful irony. The very scandal Warren had engineered to destroy her career had, in fact, made it. In a city that valued strength, people were drawn to the woman who had faced down the Walker dynasty and not only survived, but was now thriving. They saw a designer who understood that a home wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating a sanctuary, a place to feel safe. By May, she was so busy she had to hire her first assistant, a sharp and talented young woman named Ashley. Her business was exploding. Sarah and her husband, Ben, had become the family she chose. Sarah would show up on Sundays with bags of groceries and spend the afternoon helping her assemble furniture for the nursery. Ben would send her articles on modern parenting and text her small notes of encouragement. "You're going to be an incredible mom," he told her one afternoon. "You already are." And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Derek said, she actually started to believe it. Her own mother flew in for the 20-week ultrasound and stayed for the baby shower Sarah threw in her honor. A house full of laughter and light. A world away from the shadows of the Walker name. Her circle was small now. Jessica, Ethan, her mother, a handful of clients turned confidants. But Spencer admitted it felt more genuine than the hollow galas the Walkers ever hosted. Caleb, meanwhile, was a phantom. He'd fled to Dallas for some worthless sales gig, a spectacular flameout. In Austin, he was untouchable. Between the fraud, the divorce, and that infamous Christmas meltdown, Caleb was pure poison. He supposedly just vanished one morning, bag in hand. Ashley had no idea where he'd gone, nor did she seem to care. He was utterly gone from her world. His father, Harrison Walker, simply retreated inside the family estate. Ethan said the old man became a recluse on his own property. His wife scrubbed her social calendar clean. The Walker dynasty evaporated. Legacy is a fragile construct, a lifetime of work torched by one person in a season. By July, Ashley was 38 weeks along, serene and simply waiting for the inevitable. Spencer obsessed over these imagined scenes, Ashley rewashing tiny clothes, checking the go bag again and again. He knew she was preparing and terrified, but also blossoming into herself without his shadow. The night of August 9th, the thought of her hand on her belly, feeling their son, Nathan, kick, shattered him completely. He'd torment himself, wondering if she was drawing strength from her own mother, the woman who'd taught her to be a survivor. He knew she was thinking of Chloe and Ethan, her chosen family. He was haunted by visions of her mapping out a future for Nathan that bore no trace of the sterling legacy. At 3:42 a.m. on August 10th, everything began. Nathan Michael was born August 12th, 2024, at 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a shock of dark hair. For Spencer, however, that wasn't when the true nightmare began to unfold. His world ended and hers began. At 3:42 in the morning, the phone never rang for him. He could only picture her waking in the dark, her heart pounding with the knowledge that everything was about to shift. He saw her there, thinking, this is it. Spencer was fixated on that moment. He envisioned her calling her mother, who would answer on the first ring. He heard Ashley's voice, quiet but firm. It's time. And her mom, already moving. I'm on my way. Call Chloe. I'll meet you there. Everyone was summoned but him. Chloe arrived in 20 minutes, he was told. She got Ashley into the car, flying down deserted streets toward the hospital. He pictured the empty roads, the tightening contractions, and the agony of knowing he wasn't the one behind the wheel. His hand wasn't the one she was squeezing. Her mother was waiting at the entrance. He imagined that embrace felt like the only sanctuary in the world. 14 hours, 14 brutal, gut-twisting hours passed, and all the while, Spencer was a phantom, an exile who wasn't permitted to witness it. Chloe fed her ice chips while her mother held her hand, whispering encouragement. He could only stalk the rooms of his silent apartment, drowning in his own uselessness. He knew they were her pillars of strength. After 10 hours, the exhaustion of being excluded was its own physical pain. Her body was laboring to deliver their son into the world, and he was powerless. He could hear Chloe's steady voice in his mind, coaching her. You're almost there, Ashley. You're bringing him home. Home, a place that no longer included him. So, the official narrative, the one Spencer had to assemble from scraps, began at 6:37 a.m. on August 12th, with the birth of his son, Nathan Michael. He heard about the first cry secondhand, that sound of pure life. Ashley held their perfect child, and Spencer wasn't even there. He tormented himself with images of her staring at Nathan's tiny hands, that primal maternal connection locking into place. Her mother wept beside her. Her best friend Chloe filmed it all, a perfect sacred moment from which he was excommunicated. The father, the one man who should have been there, was absent. When Chloe whispered, "He's perfect," Spencer knew. That was the instant Ashley made the decision. Nathan would not be a Sterling. He would never bear that name or its toxic inheritance. Spencer felt it in his gut. Ashley was attempting to delete every trace of him from existence. The child was hers, period. From the Sterlings, there was only silence. His parents, Richard and Victoria, said nothing. Spencer had already signed away his rights, a cruel bargain brokered by his own father, who claimed it was the only path to give Ashley peace. The price was his own son. So, Nathan would grow up a stranger to his own father, a reality Ashley seemed to embrace. He would have his grandmother in town for 2 weeks. He'd have his Aunt Chloe, a daily presence. A fortress of support was built for her, while Spencer simply disintegrated. And Nathan would know Ryan. Ryan, Spencer's own cousin. His blood turned to ice when he heard Ryan had just walked into the hospital room, saw Nathan in Ashley's arms and smiled. Actually smiled. "He looks just like you," Ryan had reportedly said. The ultimate act of treason. Spencer heard the whole story later. Ryan speaking of his mother, Evelyn, saying she would have adored the baby and loved Ashley. It felt like his family was taking her side, recasting him as the villain in a history he couldn't defend. "She saw this family's truth," Ryan told her, "and you're just completing her work." Spencer felt physically ill. They were applauding her for excising him, for shattering him. He knew right then. She was vowing to raise their son in a world where Spencer was the monster. 3 days later, she brought him home. Not to their house, but to a new one she had found. A small place with a sage green nursery, stocked with books he would never read to his son. Chloe drove, her mother rode shotgun, and Nathan was right beside her. Spencer could only imagine her reaching back, her fingers brushing their son's hand, feeling a deep tranquility, a peace founded on his erasure. That house was her sanctuary, a fortress built to ensure the shadow of Spencer Sterling never fell upon them. He observed from afar as she carried Nathan indoors. Motherhood became a brutal, beautiful ritual he only witnessed in grainy images shared by others. The sleepless nights, the 2 a.m. feedings, everything he had pleaded to be part of, she now endured alone. When Nathan's tiny hand gripped her finger, she felt a love Spencer would never know with his own son. He insisted it wasn't fair. This was pure, absolute devotion, and he was a spectator. In October, their son smiled for the first time. Spencer missed it. He heard life settled into a rhythm for her after that. She worked from home, supported by the settlement and his Aunt Evelyn's trust fund. Chloe's Sunday visits were scripture. This new unit became the family that had supplanted his role entirely. Chloe was named godmother. His cousin Ryan brought toys for Nathan. Her mom flew in monthly. A new life was built on the wreckage of theirs. Then came his son's first Christmas. He spent it utterly alone. And there, the knife turned. A year after she walked out, Spencer was trapped in the cavernous, silent Sterling estate. Her small house, by contrast, was alive with light. Just her mother, Chloe, and Ryan, his own cousin, with his 4-month-old son. The silence at his home was absolute. She forged new traditions from a love that deliberately shut him out. By February, Nathan was sitting up, giggling at Ryan's ridiculous faces. And every night, Spencer imagined her whispering a promise to their son, that he was whole and complete, even without a father. Then, an artifact from their past life landed in her mailbox, an invitation to the Sterling Properties annual gala. Spencer clung to a desperate, foolish thread of hope that she might show up, that he could just see her, even for a single moment. In his mind, the invitation was a test she failed spectacularly. When Chloe asked if she planned to attend, her response was the final nail. "I owe them nothing. I'm past it." He heard the quote relayed back to him, and it sounded like a steel door locking forever. She was past it. She chose a park over the gala. When March arrived, she took Nathan to Zilker Park for a picnic. Naturally, Chloe and Ryan were there too, unfurling a blanket beneath an oak as if they were a perfect, happy family. His son sat there, stuffing his mouth with grass while Chloe laughed, telling Ashley he was fearless, just like his mother. Spencer saw a photo later. His son, flanked by the three people who methodically took his place: Chloe, her unwavering anchor, and Ryan, who had turned on his own blood to stand by her side, and her mother, who had judged him from the start. This was the family she had assembled, not with her husband, but from the shattered fragments of the life they were meant to share. It was a quiet afternoon, possessing the kind of simple joy Spencer would have traded his fortune to experience. He later heard what Ryan said to her. "You know what Evelyn would say? She'd say you did it. You broke the cycle." But Spencer knew better. She didn't break a cycle. She just broke him. And that, really, is the core of the story. The generational inheritance of control and cruelty, a twisted legacy passed down from one Walker man to the next, was meant to find its perfect vessel in Nathan. He was groomed to be a king in a world built on power, but he failed to understand that the rules of that world were changing. The toxic cycle wasn't broken for Ashley that night. It was perfected in Nathan. As the party imploded, he was left standing in the wreckage of his own making, surrounded by a family that had never chosen him, only his utility. He was a tool they had used, and in trying to destroy Ashley, he had only succeeded in making himself obsolete. The life Nathan had envisioned, one of quiet compliance and inherited power, was a fiction. In trying to crush the woman he once loved, he revealed himself to be the weakest of them all, a man so hollowed out by his family's expectations that there was nothing left of his own. His quiet compliance, his belief that playing their vicious game would keep him safe, was his gravest error. He had believed, with a desperate sincerity, that if he could just twist himself into the shape they demanded, he could protect some small part of himself. He was catastrophically wrong. The betrayal that flows from a family like the Walkers is a slow-acting poison, disguised by holiday dinners and polite smiles. Nathan drank it his whole life, and when he finally tried to administer it to someone else, he found he had only poisoned himself. He is the one who will end up with absolutely nothing and no one. The ultimate revenge against the Walkers wasn't a dramatic courtroom battle. It was the quiet, unassailable peace Ashley would go on to build, a life so full and authentic that their brand of toxicity could find no purchase. Nathan's story serves as a different kind of warning. It's about the man who becomes so lost in the venom of his own family that he fails to see he is their final, most disposable victim. His spectacular failure is a testament to a hard truth. You cannot let people who do not value you determine your worth. He was a man who ignored his own instincts in favor of his father's approval, and in doing so, he placed his own dignity on the negotiating table. He forgot that family is not just about shared blood. It's about loyalty and a love that doesn't demand the sacrifice of your soul. In the end, Nathan Walker owed the people who broke him nothing. Not his silence, not his obedience, and certainly not his future. The story of what he lost is not just about a marriage. It's told in the deafening silence of a life he single-handedly dismantled. His epic miscalculation is a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks power, without humanity, is any kind of victory at all. This story exists only because of the unflinching courage of the man we'll call Nathan, who allowed us to tell it. For our readers, Please know that some identifying details have been altered to protect the privacy of those involved. But the harrowing emotional truth of his journey, the crushing weight of family obligation, and the desperate fight to break free from it is all painfully real. A stark reminder to look after yourselves and each other.